Okay, Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly.
Nutjob Congressman Barry Lodermilk just issued his own made-up report in which he recommends criminal charges against Liz Cheney for, I don't know, snidiness? I don't know.
Interim report, December 17th, 2024. Dear colleague, in January 2023, Speaker Kevin McCarthy asked me to take on a new and challenging task, investigating the security failures at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, as well as the actions, investigation, and subsequent report of the Pelosi-appointed Select Committee on January 6th. I accepted this assignment on two conditions: that I have the autonomy and resources needed to effectively pursue the facts without political bias or outside influence, and that I have the authority to report whatever we find to the American people. McCarthy assured me that I would be given what I needed to conduct a real investigation and proper oversight. Since that day, I have taken this responsibility very seriously, and over the past 2 years, my team and I have aggressively pursued the truth and made public the evidence as we have uncovered the facts. Over the past 24 months of this investigation, my subcommittee staff have faced incredible obstacles in pursuit of the truth. Missing and deleted documents, hidden evidence, unaccounted for video footage, and uncooperative bureaucrats. At one point, the work of the subcommittee was completely halted due to the removal of Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, and subsequently faced internal efforts to derail the investigation. However, our team persevered through the delays, and when Mike Johnson took the gavel as Speaker of the House, he allocated even more resources to our investigation and committed to more transparency for the American people. Over the course of the 118th Congress, the Subcommittee on Oversight has worked many late nights and numerous weekends in their relentless pursuit of truth. We interviewed hundreds of witnesses, scoured over millions of pages of documents, analyzed thousands of hours of surveillance videos, listened to hundreds of hours of radio communications, and conducted hearings. I appreciate my team's commitment to the mission, as well as their unwavering dedication to this vitally important cause. Every member and staff member of this subcommittee deserves the gratitude of those whose reputations have been restored, as well as those who have been exonerated by the evidence they have exposed. From the D.C. National Guard, who were maligned by false reports from the Pentagon, to the former Chief of Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, who unfairly shouldered the bulk of the blame for the security failures of that day. Many have had a level of hope restored due to the work of this subcommittee. This report reveals that there was not just one single cause for what happened at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, but it was a series of intelligence, security, and leadership failures at several levels and numerous entities. Even amid multiple failures, there were two common elements that significantly contributed to the security issues: an excessive amount of political influence on critical decisions, and a greater concern over the optics than for protecting life and property. But, one, as with many government scandals, the cover-up of evidence exacerbated our efforts to find the facts and expose the truth, but our team never gave up. During the 10 years that I have served in Congress, I have had many memorable experiences. I have sat in the Oval Office and the Cabinet Room at the White House negotiating legislation with the President, flown on Air Force One, and traveled overseas to meet with foreign heads of state. However, I can unequivocally say that, above all of that, the work we have accomplished over the past 2 years on this subcommittee has given me a greater sense of accomplishment and a clarity in my purpose for being in Congress. While there is still much more to be investigated, Congress must take what we have learned thus far and begin the arduous task of making reforms within both the legislative and executive branches to ensure this level of security failure can never happen again. The American people deserve a government they can trust and be proud of. Unfortunately, the failures, cover-ups, and false accusations in the aftermath of January 6th have only increased the people's distrust of Washington, D.C. I hope the work of this subcommittee will help restore a level of hope in our government. But until we hold accountable those responsible and reform our institutions, we will not fully regain trust. Americans expect and deserve a government that is small in size, limited in scope, and fully accountable to the people, as our founders intended. The actions of some elected officials and certain government bureaucrats in the aftermath of January 6, 2021 are evidence of how we have ventured far away from those basic principles of our constitutional republic. Transparency, accountability, and equal application of the law are the only solutions to return our nation to one that is free, safe, and full of opportunity. I sincerely pray that this report is just the beginning of an era of restoring our federal government to the basic principles of transparency and accountability. God bless. Barry Lodermilk, Chairman, Subcommittee on Oversight, Committee on House Administration. 2. Contents. Introduction. The Committee on House Administration Subcommittee on Oversight, chaired by Congressman Barry Lodermilk, has spent the past 2 years of the 118th Congress investigating the security failures of January 6, 2021, which House Democrats failed to investigate in their 117th Congress Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. The purpose of this investigation was to identify and review the numerous security failures on and leading up to January 6, 2021, and to review the creation, operation, and results of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's Select Committee. Speaker Pelosi and House Democrats spent millions of taxpayer dollars on their politically motivated Select Committee, yet failed to accurately and in a bipartisan manner investigate the security failures of that day. Instead, the members of the Select Committee were laser-focused on their effort to promote their false, predetermined narrative that President Trump was personally responsible for the breach of the Capitol on January 6 and should therefore be held accountable by any means necessary. Throughout its nearly 2 years of work, the Select Committee presented uncorroborated, cherry-picked, and, at times, false evidence that fit its narrative. The Select Committee did not attempt to hide its bias and, in fact, memorialized its own failures and prejudice when it published its final report in December 2022. A review of the nearly 1,000-page report reveals Speaker Pelosi's multi-million-dollar Select Committee was a political weapon with a singular focus to deceive the public into blaming President Trump for the violence on January 6 and to tarnish the legacy of his first presidency. The Select Committee wholeheartedly failed to address the security failures on January 6, 2021, and failed to archive significant portions of the evidence it collected and used to formulate its conclusions. As a result, the Capitol is no safer today than it was at the creation of the Select Committee. The mission of Chairman Lodermilk's subcommittee this Congress was to identify the truth for the American public and conduct the investigation originally tasked to the Select Committee. To provide truth, full transparency, and fulfill our commitment to the American people, we spent this past Congress investigating why the Capitol was ill-prepared and what security changes are needed to ensure adequate protection for members of Congress, the thousands of staff who work in the Capitol complex, and the millions of people who visit the site each year. Our goal for the 118th Congress was not to rewrite the events of January 6 nor to promote a political narrative. It is the firm belief of the subcommittee that it is Congress's duty to provide full transparency to the American people so they can draw their own conclusions based on all the information available, not just the information that supports one perspective. 6. This report summarizes the past 2 years of investigation by the subcommittee and findings based on nonpartisan evidence, first-hand accounts of events, and thorough comparisons of official records, hearings, and letters at the direction of Chairman Barry Lodermilk. 7. Jurisdiction. Chairman Lodermilk and the Committee on House Administration Oversight Subcommittee has jurisdiction over the records created by former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's partisan January 6 Select Committee. Unfortunately, a substantial portion of those records were deleted or otherwise withheld from the subcommittee. Chairman Lodermilk has worked tirelessly to retrieve the deliberately lost evidence and complete the picture of the events of January 6, regardless of politics or optics. The truth will prevail. Rule 10 of the House Rules of the 118th Congress state that the Committee on House Administration has jurisdiction over the administration of the House office buildings and of the House wing of the Capitol. This includes oversight of the United States Capitol Police and the security of the Capitol complex. Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee are charged with the records of the Select Committee. 3 specifically at the start of the 118th Congress. The resolution, adopting the rules of the House, reiterated that any records obtained by the Select Committee be transferred to the committee. The subcommittee is authorized to gather evidence on matters within its jurisdiction, specifically with respect to congressional security and the accountability of legislative branch security. 8. Establishment of Pelosi's flawed Select Committee. On June 30th, 2021, the Democrat House majority passed House Resolution 503 establishing the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. The Select Committee, with its more than $18 million budget, resulted in little more than Hollywood-produced political theater and wasted taxpayer dollars to create an error-filled narrative masquerading as a congressional report. Throughout its nearly 2 years of work, the Select Committee presented uncorroborated, cherry-picked evidence to build its narrative. The sole purpose of the Select Committee was to prevent President Trump from seeking re-election to the White House. In contrast, Chairman Barry Lodermilk and the Committee on House Administration Subcommittee on Oversight investigated the full array of security and intelligence breakdowns at the United States Capitol in the days leading up to and on January 6, 2021. In the course of its investigation, the subcommittee identified numerous inexcusable failures that should have been avoided and must be addressed moving forward. The events of January 6, 2021 were preventable. The politicization of Capitol security directly contributed to the many structural and procedural failures witnessed that day. Through the subcommittee's robust oversight of the United States Capitol Police and supporting entities, the subcommittee remains committed to ensuring necessary reforms to USCP operations and the Capitol's physical security. Flawed composition of the Select Committee. The day after the House voted on House Resolution 503 to create the Select Committee, Speaker Pelosi named 7 Democrats and 1 Republican, Liz Cheney, to represent the interests of the Democrats. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy proposed 5 Republicans to represent the minority. And in an outlandish and unprecedented move, Speaker Pelosi rejected the House Minority Leader's nominations. Despite claiming to model the Select Committee after the Republican-led Select Committee on the events surrounding the 2012 terrorist attacks in Benghazi, wherein then Minority Leader Pelosi appointed 5 Democrat members of her choosing to sit on that committee, Speaker Pelosi refused to extend the same courtesy to Minority Leader McCarthy. She justified this radical move with this blanket excuse. The unprecedented nature of January 6 demands this unprecedented decision. Unfortunately for the American public, this excuse would be used by the Select Committee throughout the course of its existence to justify a multitude of untoward and unprecedented actions. Minority Leader McCarthy refused to play along with Speaker Pelosi's clearly partisan Select Committee and withdrew all 5 of the Republican appointments. As a result, Speaker Pelosi named Representative Adam Kinzinger, the only Republican other than Representative Cheney, to vote in favor of the creation of the Select Committee, as the 9th and final member of the Select Committee. According to House Rule 10, Clause 5, the members of standing committees shall be elected from nominations submitted by the respective party caucus or conference. But Speaker Pelosi ignored this rule. Despite H.Res. 503 dictating that the Select Committee consists of 13 members, 5 of whom in consultation with the Minority Leader, Speaker Pelosi pushed ahead with the 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans, selected by the majority who had demonstrated their commitment to the destruction of President Trump. For example, Representatives Jamie Raskin and Adam Schiff both served as impeachment managers against President Trump prior to their appointment to the Select Committee. The Select Committee's unwritten purpose was to prevent President Trump from seeking re-election in 2024. It was no secret that, after Speaker Pelosi failed to secure a conviction in the Senate for the second time, the only way to guarantee that President Trump could not return to office would be if he was found to have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States in violation of the 14th Amendment. 17. This idea was published in major newspapers within days of January 6 and spoken about frequently in left-wing circles. 18. Speaker Pelosi knew that the best pathway to stop President Trump from returning to the White House was if the Select Committee could craft a narrative compelling enough to convince the Department of Justice and the judicial system, along with the American public, that President Trump was an insurrectionist. House Resolution 503 mandated that the Select Committee investigate the facts, circumstances, and causes of January 6 and the preparedness and response of law enforcement. 19. Instead, as evidenced by the Select Committee's final report, it deployed its vast resources to attempt to prevent President Trump from returning to the White House. H.Res. 503's mandate does not mention an investigation of President Trump, but the Select Committee still managed to include President Trump's name more than 1,900 times in its final report. Replacing the missing ranking member with a pseudo-vice chair, House Resolution 5.3 required the chairman of the Select Committee to consult with the ranking minority member for several important functions, including issuing subpoenas and ordering depositions. The Select Committee did not have a ranking minority member. The term ranking minority member has a clearly understood meaning under House rules, and both parties have procedures for appointing ranking members to committees. 21. Both the Republican Conference and the Democratic Caucus rules require their respective steering committees to first nominate members for the role of ranking member, and then the conference or caucus votes on those recommendations. Without the Republicans sending any members to the Select Committee, there was no possibility for the Select Committee to regard either of the 2 Republicans on that committee as a ranking member. Instead, several months after the Select Committee was constituted, and more than a month after its first hearing, Chair Benny Thompson named Representative Liz Cheney as vice chair. 2.3. The position of vice chair is fundamentally distinct and functionally different than that of a ranking member. 24. Importantly, House rules dictate that the vice chair of any standing or subcommittee be member of the majority party, and if the chair and vice chair are both unavailable, the ranking majority member who is present shall preside. In an effort to sidestep the fatal absence of a ranking member, the Select Committee treated Vice Chair Cheney as the functional equivalent. This obfuscation of the Select Committee's establishing rules alone may discredit its work. This issue has been raised in lawsuits challenging the authority of the Select Committee. But the courts chose to avoid the issue by asserting sua sponte, the speech or debate clause of the United States Constitution. 26. This follows the long-standing trend of federal courts deferring on issues within the 2 other branches of the federal government. 27. Because the courts will not interject to declare invalid the Select Committee's attempt to name a member of the opposing. 11. Party as vice chair and have her assume, without authority and against House rules, the role of ranking member. Congress itself must right its former wrongs and declare this appointment of Representative Cheney invalid now. Our Select Committee's unprecedented exemption from certain House rules. House Democrats included an exemption to H. Rule 11 in the authorizing resolution that created the Select Committee. Rule 11 required that committee rules provide equal time to the majority and minority party members to ask alternating questions. Under Rule 11, committees may adopt a rule that gives members more than 5 minutes for questioning witnesses, but the extension would have had to apply equally to the majority and minority. By removing Rule 11, House Democrats gave Chair Thompson unregulated power to run the Select Committee in ways that other committees could not, and effectively nullified any possibility of fairness, even if Minority Leader McCarthy had been able to seat his original 5 members. Even with the exclusion of Rule 11, H.Res. 503 still required Chair Thompson to consult with the ranking member before issuing subpoenas or ordering depositions. The Select Committee's exemption from some rules and refusal to follow others contribute to the dubious nature of its work and conclusions. All committee chairs have the responsibility to archive non-current committee records at the end of each Congress. 32. It is a chair's responsibility to transfer these records to the clerk of the House, who subsequently stores those records with the National Archives and Records Administration. 33. The House Clerk's Office generally holds these records for 2 years prior to sending them to NARA. 34. The resolution establishing the Select Committee added an additional reporting requirement by mandating all records of the committee be transferred to any committee designated by the Speaker of the House. 35 days before the new Republican majority was sworn in, Speaker Pelosi sent a letter to Chair Thompson designating Select Committee records be transferred to the Committee on House Administration. At the beginning of the 118th Congress, H.Res. 5 reiterated that all records from the Select Committee be transferred to the Committee on House Administration. 37. Republicans on Chairman Lodermilk's subcommittee immediately inventoried all records turned over by the Select Committee. This included both printed documents and digital records. During this initial document review, the subcommittee determined that the Select Committee archived and provided roughly 270 transcribed interviews of witness testimonies and fewer than 3 terabytes of digital data. House Rule 7 requires committees to submit non-current records to the House Clerk at the end of each Congress. 38 under House Rule 7. It is the responsibility of the chair of each committee to transfer to the House Clerk any non-current records of such committee. 39 House Rules continue to define non-current records as an official permanent record of the committee. The House Clerk specifies that depositions, transcripts, executive branch communications, and other similar recordings are among the records that should be archived pursuant to House rules. Nevertheless, as part of its investigation, the subcommittee learned that the Select Committee failed to archive or provide the subcommittee with any of its video recordings of witness interviews. As many as 900 interview summaries or transcripts, more than 1 terabyte of digital data. Concerningly, of the documents that were archived, the Select Committee delivered more, 13, than 100 encrypted password-protected documents and never provided the passwords. It is unclear why the Select Committee chose only those documents to be shielded by password. The failure to provide the subcommittee with these records raises serious concerns about the content of the records and their contribution to the Select Committee's narrative. Furthermore, the failure to archive these records rests on Chair Thompson, who had an obligation under House Rule 7 to transfer to the clerk any non-current records. Failure to archive all non-current records, the corresponding transcripts, and the recovered password-protected encrypted files is in violation of House rules and obstructs the subcommittee's investigation into Capitol security. More than 1 terabyte of missing digital data. Based on an inventory of this digital data and statements from Chair Thompson, the subcommittee discovered that the Select Committee failed to archive more than 1 terabyte of digital data. In a July 7, 2022 letter to Chairman Lodermilk, Representative Thompson claimed that the Select Committee archived over 4 terabyte of digital data. 43. However, after reviewing this archive file, the subcommittee received less than 3 terabytes of digital data from the Select Committee. 1 terabyte is a substantial amount of missing data. 1 terabyte of data is equivalent to 6.5 million document pages, such as PDFs or Office files, 500 hours of high-definition video, or 250,000 photos. Included in the physical files the Select Committee archived was a memorandum from the Select Committee's e-discovery platform contractor, dated December 28, 2022, in which the contractor explicitly states that the Select Committee excluded committee work product and documents that deemed as sensitive from its archiving process. 44. It is unclear what files were excluded, but it is clear that the Select Committee instructed its e-discovery contractor to proactively remove certain files from the archive it prepared and subsequently turned over to the subcommittee. Missing video recordings of witness interviews. Despite playing a prominent role in its hearings, the Select Committee refused to archive any of the video recordings it collected of witness interviews or depositions as required per House rules. 45. During its primetime hearings, the Select Committee used numerous selectively edited clips from these video recordings to build its predetermined narrative. Representative Cheney noted in her memoir that the Select Committee decided that reading witness transcripts during their primetime hearings was unlikely to be effective, and instead they needed the public to see the witness on camera recounting their testimony. According to Representative Cheney, the video recordings of their many interviews were indispensable to the Select Committee's efforts to convey its narrative. 47. On June 26, 2023, Chairman Lodermilk sent Representative Thompson a letter seeking additional information about these recordings. 48. Representative Thompson replied on July 7, 2023, stating that the Select Committee did not archive any of the unedited video recordings of witness interviews or depositions. Representative Thompson argued that the Select Committee was not obligated to archive all video recordings of transcribed interviews or depositions. 50. Representative Thompson claimed this determination was based on guidance the Select Committee received from the House Clerk. However, according to official guidance from the House Clerk on what records should be archived, the list includes video of events, testimonies, and interviews. 51. Representative Thompson failed to produce any records of the guidance he claimed to have received. Without the full videos of these transcribed interviews and depositions, neither the subcommittee nor the American public are able to review and understand the full context of the video clips shown during the Select Committee's hearings. Similar to Representative Cheney's observation, printed transcripts do not convey emotion, movements, or voice inflections. The missing videos, along with the multitude of other missing documents and data that the Select Committee chose to withhold from further scrutiny, contribute to the subcommittee's doubts of the accuracy and objectivity of the Select Committee's work. Letters. Select Committee inaccuracies, cover-ups, and covert conversations. Representative Liz Cheney. Former Representative Elizabeth Cheney emerged as the principal figure driving the Select Committee's narrative. On May 12, 2021, Representative Cheney proudly stated, "I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office." 6 weeks later, Speaker Pelosi named Representative Cheney as one of her 8 selections and a founding member of the partisan Select Committee. Speaker Pelosi entrusted Representative Cheney to focus the Select Committee's efforts on diminishing President Trump's political future, and Representative Cheney delivered. Representative Cheney mentions President Trump 18 separate times in her 4-page forward to the Select Committee's final report, including her statements that no man who behaved as President Trump can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again, and that is unfit for any office. 53. In contrast, she fails to mention any of the tangible failures of that day. Representative Cheney spoke of law enforcement only twice and never mentioned the National Guard or the multi-agency intelligence failures. It appears as though Representative Cheney leveraged her unique position on the Select Committee to fulfill her promise to do everything can to keep President Trump away from the Oval Office. Representative Cheney's influence on the Select Committee's work and the conclusions it drew cannot be overstated. Before the Select Committee published its final report, 15 current and former staffers approached the Washington Post to express deep frustration with Representative Cheney's heavy-handed oversight of the Select Committee's work. The article states that committee staff members were floored when told that the final report would focus almost entirely on Trump. Another staff member stated, when it became a Cheney 2024 campaign. Many of us became discouraged. The article continues, people familiar with the committee's work said Cheney has taken a far more hands-on role than Benny G. Thompson. And he is said by multiple staffers to want the report to focus on Trump, and has pushed for the hearings to focus extensively on his conduct, and not what she views as other sideshows. The subcommittee's investigation revealed that few beyond Representative Cheney would consider the failures of senior Pentagon officials general. 17th, unpreparedness of Capitol Police and the multi-agency intelligence failures that contributed to the events of January 6 as sideshows. Representative Cheney's exhaustive efforts aside, the Select Committee initially struggled to produce a cohesive narrative that could lay the entirety of the blame on President Trump. The Select Committee needed a star witness who could be seen to give credibility to the narrative it was determined to convey. Through thousands of hours of interviews and the interrogation of hundreds of witnesses, it is noteworthy that the Select Committee chose to focus the conclusions of its nearly 1,000-page report largely on the uncorroborated and inconsistent testimony of one witness, Cassidy Hutchinson. Hutchinson gave Representative Cheney and the other members of the Select Committee exactly what they were looking for. Cassidy Hutchinson. Cassidy Hutchinson was a 24-year-old special assistant to the president and coordinator for legislative affairs for White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows during his tenure as Chief of Staff, the position she held on January 6, 2021. Prior to this position, she participated in the White House internship program and then worked full-time as a staff assistant at the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. According to testimony given to the subcommittee by White House employees who worked closely with Hutchinson during her time in Meadows' office, her responsibilities consisted primarily of accompanying Meadows throughout the day, organizing his schedule, and other administrative duties within the office. She communicated regularly with other White House employees to plan and organize Meadows' calendar, and she had a desk located near the doorway leading to Meadows' office. Despite initial reporting that Hutchinson became unemployed for a period of time at the end of the first Trump administration, it was revealed that Hutchinson continued to work as a coordinator for Trump's official, taxpayer-funded post-presidential office from about January 20th, 2021 to April 1st, 2021, and earned an annualized salary of $90,000 for that work, according to the Government Services Administration. Among the many unsubstantiated claims made by Hutchinson throughout her interactions with Representative Cheney and the Select Committee, Hutchinson proclaimed that she was disgusted by President Trump's actions and called his activity unpatriotic and un-American. 64. It is noteworthy, then, that Hutchinson continued working for President Trump for 9 weeks after his presidency, despite the testimony she gave against his character and actions surrounding January 6th. Multiple reports allege that Hutchinson planned to move to Mar-a-Lago with President Trump and form part of his post-presidential staff. 65, however, President Trump came to believe that Hutchinson was responsible for leaking the list of employees he planned to have work for him in Florida, and he personally disinvited Hutchinson from moving. Before the Select Committee was formed, President Trump had heard negative things about Hutchinson, including that she was a total phony and leaker. 67. In a post on his Truth Social, he asked, "Why did she want to go with us if she felt we were so terrible?" The subcommittee was unable to identify an answer to this question. Cassidy Hutchinson claimed that Meadows informed her in the final days of the administration that she was not going to continue working for President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. 69. It is unclear when she had her last day as an employee for President Trump, but it remains a fact that nearly a year after the events of January 6, 2021, she contacted the Trump team to obtain an attorney to help represent her before the inquests of the Select Committee. Representative Cheney's initial interactions with Cassidy Hutchinson. The Select Committee began its investigation by interviewing hundreds of individuals it believed were connected to the events of January 6, 2021. Hutchinson was one of those individuals. Hutchinson could not afford an attorney, so she contacted two close allies of President Trump, Eric Hirschman and Alex Cannon, who secured attorney Stefan Passantino to represent Hutchinson at no cost to her. 71. Initially, Hutchinson gave two under oath testimonies, each lasting several hours. 72. Those two lengthy yet largely insignificant interviews with Hutchinson brought her limited notoriety, with several news outlets attributing claims of 19. Republican politicians seeking pardons and foreknowledge of violence leading up to January 6 to Hutchinson. Following her second interview, Hutchinson drastically switched her narrative and began testifying to a variety of unsubstantiated and uncorroborated claims that ultimately appeared in the Select Committee's final report. It is not entirely clear why Hutchinson suddenly altered her testimony, but the subcommittee has uncovered evidence of secret conversations between Hutchinson, former White House employee Alyssa Farah Griffin, and, troublingly, conversations between Hutchinson and Representative Cheney without the knowledge of Hutchinson's attorney. Alyssa Farah Griffin back-channeled with Vice Chair Liz Cheney to help Hutchinson change her story. For nearly a month, Farah Griffin acted as an intermediary between Vice Chair Cheney and the Select Committee's star witness, Hutchinson. As an intermediary, Farah Griffin helped coordinate Hutchinson's third transcribed interview, without the knowledge of Hutchinson's attorney, Stefan Passantino. 75. In a television panel with a member of the Select Committee, Representative Raskin, a year following the end of the Select Committee, Hutchinson freely stated that she had back-channeled for a third interview without my former attorney's knowledge at the time, with one of my good friends, Alyssa Farah Griffin. 76 at this time, Farah Griffin and Hutchinson discussed the optics of Hutchinson leaking new information to the press instead of testifying directly to the Select Committee. Hutchinson's messages indicate that she and Farah Griffin colluded to create a false story about why Hutchinson needed to do a third transcribed interview for the Select Committee to convince her attorney, Passantino. 78-20. 79. In her May 17, 2021 transcribed interview, Hutchinson testified to a series of uncorroborated and unverified stories that conveniently fit the Select Committee's anti-Trump narrative. Despite already testifying to the Select Committee twice, Hutchinson never previously mentioned this new information. 79. Cassidy Hutchinson, private signal text conversation with Alyssa Farrah Griffin. 21. The subcommittee was only able to obtain a limited number of text messages from Hutchinson and Farrah Griffin, but Representative Cheney's influence on Hutchinson is apparent from that point forward by her dramatic change in testimony and eventual claims against President Trump using second and third-hand accounts. For example, Hutchinson claimed that White House Deputy Chief of Staff Anthony Ornato told her that Trump lunged towards the driver of his car after Trump's request to go to the Capitol was denied. This story has never been corroborated and was directly refuted by both the United States Secret Service agents in the vehicle with President Trump that day and Ornato himself. Vice Chair Liz Cheney continued communicating directly with Cassidy Hutchinson despite problematic ethical implications. After her third transcribed interview, Hutchinson reached out to Representative Cheney directly. While Hutchinson revealed the general timing of these conversations in her book, the extent and content of their communication was not previously disclosed until they were uncovered by Chairman Lodermilk. 81. When Hutchinson texted Representative Cheney, she was still represented by Passantino, which Representative Cheney knew. Representative Cheney and Hutchinson communicated directly for days without Passantino's knowledge. It is unusual and potentially unethical for a member of Congress conducting an investigation to contact a witness if the member knows that the individual is represented by legal counsel. Representative Cheney is an attorney, and an attorney who circumvents an individual's legal representation would violate well-established attorney ethics standards and the Washington, D.C. bar rules of professional conduct, regardless of who initiates the contact. 82. While it is not clear how the D.C. bar would apply this rule to an attorney who also sits as a member of Congress, its rules state that a lawyer shall not communicate or cause another to communicate about the subject of the representation with a person known to be represented by another lawyer in the matter. This appears to be precisely what Representative Cheney did at this time, and within a matter of days of these secret conversations. Hutchinson would go on to recant her previous testimony and introduce her most outlandish claims. It must be emphasized that Representative Cheney would likely have known her communications without the knowledge of Hutchinson's attorney were illicit and unethical at that time. Farrah 22. Griffin indicated as much in her previously mentioned message to Hutchinson on April 28, 2022, when she wrote that Representative Cheney's one concern was that as long as Hutchinson was represented by counsel, she can't really ethically talk to you without him. 84. Despite Representative Cheney's initial hesitation, the subcommittee uncovered evidence of frequent, direct conversations between Hutchinson and Representative Cheney without Passantino's knowledge, and also through their intermediary Farrah Griffin. 85. Understandably, Representative Cheney attempted to distance herself from the appearance of impropriety in her memoir published in the aftermath of the Select Committee. In her words, she was sympathetic to situation, but did not want our committee to be advising her on what to do next. 86. It remains to be determined why Representative Cheney would allegedly avoid communicating with Hutchinson in April because of her commitment to ethics, but would communicate with her frequently under those same circumstances in May and June as the date of their televised hearing grew closer. Vice Chair Cheney covertly assisted Hutchinson and influenced her to fire her attorney. Representative Cheney's influence on Hutchinson went beyond contacting Hutchinson directly. Representative Cheney played a primary role in Hutchinson firing her current, free to her legal counsel, Passantino, and even provided Hutchinson with a list of attorneys that would likely contribute to building the Select Committee's narrative. 87. The account of how Hutchinson terminated her counsel and hired new counsel varies in important ways between Hutchinson's and Representative Cheney's respective memoirs, both published in the aftermath of the Select Committee. According to Representative Cheney, her concerns for respecting ethical boundaries limited her contribution to Hutchinson's strategy, and she passively waited for Hutchinson to fire her attorney and find new counsel on her own. 23. 88. Unfortunately for Representative Cheney, Hutchinson published her own memoir and recounted a different set of circumstances. In her book Enough, Hutchinson stated that not only did Representative Cheney play an integral part in Hutchinson's developing testimony, but even provided Hutchinson with a list of attorneys to replace her current counsel. 89. Far from passively observing, Representative Cheney took an active role in securing Select Committee-friendly attorneys to represent Hutchinson. The next day, she called and provided me with contact information for multiple attorneys at various firms. 91. In addition, the signal messages recovered by Chairman Lodermilk demonstrate that Representative Cheney and Hutchinson spoke directly with one another several days before Hutchinson ultimately terminated her attorney. What other information was communicated during these phone calls may never be known, but what is known is that Representative Cheney consciously attempted to minimize her contact with Hutchinson in her book. And the most likely reason to try to bury that information would be if representative. 24. Cheney knew that it was improper and unethical to communicate with Hutchinson without her counsel present. On June 9, 2022, Hutchinson formally ended her attorney-client relationship with her first attorney, Stephan Passantino. 93 that same day, she retained attorneys Bill Jordan and Jody Hunt of Alston and Byrd at the recommendation of Representative Cheney. 94. In a twist of irony, Representative Cheney spoke out forcefully against individuals who endeavored to influence witness testimony in the Select Committee. At the end of the Select Committee hearing in which Hutchinson testified, Representative Cheney stated, "Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously." 95. In an interview with ABC News the following day, Representative Cheney reportedly stated that the Select Committee may make a criminal referral to the Justice Department, recommending that anybody attempting to influence witness testimony before the committee be prosecuted for witness tampering. 96. Whether lacking in self-awareness or to obfuscate her own furtive behavior, it is consistent with the Select Committee's practice of lodging accusations against against President Trump and those associated with him as if those accusations are fact, when the Select Committee itself was engaged in the very behavior it had accused of President Trump. Cassidy Hutchinson's 4 subsequent interviews and live testimony. On June 20th, 2022, less than 2 weeks after Hutchinson fired Passantino and hired the attorneys Representative Cheney suggested, Hutchinson sat for her 4th transcribed interview with the Select Committee under unusual circumstances. Prior to this interview, nearly every interview the Select Committee conducted included approximately a dozen people, including committee staff members, committee counsel, often a member of the Select Committee, the interviewee, and the interviewee's legal representation. Most of the interviews were done in large conference rooms or over Zoom, allowing space for all participants. Hutchinson's 4th transcribed interview, however, was vastly different. It consisted of only 4 people, Representative Cheney, 1 attorney from the Select Committee, Hutchinson, and Hutchinson's new counsel. Additionally, instead of the Select Committee conducting the interview in a conference room or virtually, Representative Cheney used her private hideaway inside of the United States Capitol building. In light of the extravagant nature of the claims Hutchinson made during her 3rd and 4th interviews, it would be prudent for the Select Committee to invest a portion of its substantial 25 resources into investigating the veracity of Hutchinson's 2nd and 3rd-hand accounts. But Representative Cheney decided instead to rush Hutchinson's narrative into the public domain. Just days before Hutchinson's public testimony, the Select Committee had revised its schedule to postpone hearings for several weeks. Instead, Representative Cheney scheduled an emergency public hearing, 98, to create the appearance of urgency. 6 days after Hutchinson's 4th interview, on June 26, 2022, Representative Cheney gave Hutchinson and her new attorney Bill Jordan a preparatory walkthrough of the Cannon caucus room. 99 Hutchinson testified the following day, during network television primetime, on June 28. 100 according to public reporting, and to the consternation of Select Committee staff. Cheney's decision to rush Hutchinson's testimony caused unforced errors and did not afford staff the opportunity to thoroughly vet the line of questioning. 101. It is no surprise that the claims made in Hutchinson's first 2 sworn interviews vary substantially from the claims she made following Representative Cheney's direct intervention. Her first 2 interviews, though consistent with one another, were significantly different than the narrative she told in her 4 subsequent interviews and live testimony. This change may also explain why the Select Committee released the text of Hutchinson's transcribed interviews in reverse order, with the testimony most helpful to its messaging published first. And her first 2 interviews, which contradicted her later elaborate claims, published only 5 days before the end of the Select Committee. 102, the Select Committee needed a witness who could provide the vehicle for the message it desired to convey, and Hutchinson's sensational new testimony gave the Select Committee exactly what it was seeking. At the beginning of its investigation, the subcommittee reached out to the FBI requesting Hutchinson's FD 302, a report used by agents to summarize and record information from interviews, to compare the testimony she gave to the FBI to the testimony she gave to the Select Committee. To date, the FBI has not responded to the subcommittee's request. Select Committee findings and evidence that disprove Cassidy Hutchinson's allegations. Despite the Select Committee's exhaustive interviews of hundreds of witnesses, Cassidy Hutchinson was the only witness to testify to a series of specific, outrageous claims about President Trump on January 6, 2021. Nearly all her allegations involve incidents to which she, 26, was not an eyewitness, and the party she credited for relaying those alleged events to her categorically denied her claims. Ultimately, Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee uncovered evidence available to the Select Committee, disproving her 8 most sensational claims. Hutchinson's willingness to testify under oath to these demonstrably false claims proves her unreliability as a witness. The Select Committee's decision to craft its narrative almost exclusively on the unchallenged, uncorroborated claims of one witness fails to meet even the most basic investigative standards, and as a result, the Select Committee's final report lacks any credibility. Finding 1, President Trump did not attack his Secret Service detail at any time on January 6. Finding 2, there was no pre-planned off-the-record move to the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6. Finding 3, there is no evidence that President Trump agreed with rioters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Finding 4, Cassidy Hutchinson falsely claimed to have drafted a handwritten note for President Trump on January 6. Finding 5, President Trump did not have intelligence indicating violence on the morning of January 6. Finding 6, Cassidy Hutchinson lied about the classification status of documents to disparage Mark Meadows. Finding 7, Representative Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson attempted to disbar Stefan Passantino. Finding 8, Cassidy Hutchinson misrepresented President Trump's actions at Lafayette Square Park in the summer of 2020. Finding 1, President Trump did not attack his Secret Service detail at any time on January 6. Perhaps the most memorable of Cassidy Hutchinson's allegations about President Trump's behavior on January 6 was the contention that President Trump attempted to seize the steering wheel from the control of the driver of his Secret Service detail, and when that was unsuccessful, Hutchinson claimed that he lunged toward the neck of the other agent in the vehicle. This hoax dominated the news cycle for several weeks. 104 she said to have heard this story third hand, from Tony Ornato, who heard it from Robert Bobby Engel, who was one of the agents who rode in President Trump's vehicle. In her public testimony before the Select Committee, Hutchinson stated, 105, Hutchinson motioned towards her clavicle while describing the alleged incident. 106 as if to indicate that President Trump had lunged at his own detail's neck somewhere along the drive from the ellipse to the White House, a drive that takes no more than 1 minute to complete. The Select Committee previously conducted transcribed interviews under oath with Engel and Ornato, and neither of those two witnesses made any mention of an attack or rage on that short drive. 107. Both Ornato and Engel, as well as the Secret Service agent driving the vehicle, spoke out to categorically deny Hutchinson's story the same day as Hutchinson's public testimony to the Select Committee. 108. It is unclear to the subcommittee why the Select Committee did not seek to corroborate Hutchinson's story by conducting follow-up interviews with Ornato or Engel, or 104 Alan Smith and Peter Alexander, former Meadows aide. Trump lunged at Secret Service agent, tried to grab steering wheel on January 6, NBC News. 105 on the January 6th investigation, hearing before the H, Select Com, to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. 117th Cong, 106 ID, 107 ID, 108 Alan Smith and Peter Alexander, former Meadows aide. Trump lunged at Secret Service agent, tried to grab steering wheel on January 6, NBC News. 28. Interviewing the driver before going public with Hutchinson's third-hand testimony. Those three eyewitnesses to her allegations were not interviewed again by the Select Committee for more than 4 months after Hutchinson's hearing. 109. The Select Committee chose to promote Hutchinson's version of events, citing a series of other unnamed individuals who were further removed from the alleged incident than even Hutchinson, over that of 2 federal law enforcement agents who were the only possible eyewitnesses. In his November interview, nearly 5 months after Hutchinson's testimony, Engel said this about the alleged attack. 110. The Select Committee did not give President Trump's Secret Service driver the opportunity to give his recollection of those events until November 2022. 111. He testified that he had not been contacted by the Select Committee in any way until that time. The driver testified to the following. 29. 112. Waiting nearly 5 months to interview the 2 Secret Service agents and Ornato, who could verify Hutchinson's story, is unjustifiable. In addition to the Select Committee's apparent lack of interest in verifying its most sensational claims, the members of the Select Committee demonstrated a steady determination to its narrative, despite the ever-increasing exculpatory evidence and the outright denials by each of the eyewitnesses. The driver clearly stated either of those things happened. In response, Representative Cheney asked the driver a question, alluding that the driver did not understand Hutchinson's testimony. 114. Representative Cheney's efforts to distinguish between a physical assault and a physical altercation is significant. If Hutchinson's version of events conflicted with the first-hand accounts of the other witnesses, it would damage Representative Cheney's desired narrative. In an effort to rehabilitate Hutchinson's testimony in the face of contradictory first-hand accounts, Representative Cheney attempted to draw a distinction between Hutchinson's words and the actual witness's recollection. A physical assault has a legal criminal definition and is more substantial. A physical altercation, on the other hand, is obscure and subjective. Representative Cheney described the alleged event as a physical altercation during Hutchinson's public testimony, but conveniently called it an assault in the Secret Service driver's interview, knowing the agent would deny the stronger language. 116. Unfortunately for the Select Committee's narrative, the narrative that President Trump was unhinged and willing to get into physical altercations with his Secret Service detail. The driver's declaration that either of those things happened, 117, left no room to doubt that Hutchinson's third-hand accounting of the event was baseless. Finding 2, there was no pre-planned off-the-record move to the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6. The Select Committee claimed there was a plan in place for President Trump to go to the Capitol after his speech at the Ellipse. 118, the subcommittee has reviewed more than 15 interview transcripts from White House and Secret Service employees that contradict the notion of a Secret Service plan to go to the Capitol. Outside of a brief mention of the idea, the move was merely a rumor blown out of proportion by the Select Committee. 31. Many agents at the highest levels within the Secret Service testified to the Select Committee that an off-the-record move to the Capitol was never more than a rumor. Casually raised on January 4th, 2021, and never seriously considered. 120. The Select Committee hid these transcripts. Although the Select Committee's report alludes that the OTR move to the Capitol was a matter of fact, buried in a footnote in the same report, the Select Committee admits the following. 121. See the full account by Robert Engel, head of President Trump's Secret Service detail, explaining that the idea of an OTR was a hypothetical from Bobby Peede, the director of Presidential Advance. That never seriously came up again. 122. It is clear that once again, Hutchinson's testimony about the OTR and the physical altercation in the Beast is refuted by multiple sources and corroborated by none. Yet the Select Committee still relied heavily on her testimony throughout their investigation and in their final report. Finding 3. There is no evidence that President Trump agreed with rioters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." The Select Committee, relying on nothing other than Hutchinson's testimony, incorrectly asserted in its report that President Trump agreed with the rioters chanting that Vice President Pence deserved to be hanged. 123 from the Select Committee report. 124. Cassidy Hutchinson presented an evolving account of the claim that President Trump supported the idea that Vice President Pence deserved to be hanged. Initially, Hutchinson failed to mention this allegation, or anything at all related to hangings, in either her February 23, 2022, or March 7, 2022, interviews with the Select Committee. 125. It was not until her May 17, 2022, interview that the topic came up at all, and it was at Representative Cheney's insistence. Cassidy Hutchinson's first narrative of the chanting incident lacks internal cohesion. Hutchinson states that she personally saw and heard Meadows and President Trump discuss the rioters' chants about hanging Vice President Pence and how Meadows and President Trump personally felt about it at the time. 127. 33. 128. However, just a few minutes later in that same interview, Hutchinson claims that she had no first-hand knowledge of President Trump's personal feelings about the chant, having neither seen nor heard him talk about it with Meadows. 129. She states that she could only testify to her understanding of the conversation, and that she could not specify President Trump's intent when this alleged conversation took place because she wasn't there. 130. 131. In fact, the most specific claim Hutchinson makes in that same interview about the alleged conversation between President Trump and Meadows comes from her third-hand eavesdropping on a conversation between Meadows and 2, Attorneys who worked as White House counsel and as senior advisors for President Trump, Pasquale Pat Cipollone and Eric Hirschman, respectively. 132 Hutchinson attributes her claim that Trump agreed with the rioters' chant to her recollection of this conversation. 133 in her words. Mr. Trump had hypothetically potentially said that maybe perhaps the chants were justified. 134. 135. The Select Committee took Hutchinson's 3 conflicting stories of the same incident at face value for their final report. This level of indifference to the veracity of Hutchinson's claims permeates the Select Committee's report and serves to highlight Representative Cheney and the House Democrats' willingness to stretch an idea of an allegation into a full-blown accusation, or in most cases, a foregone conclusion. Nearly 18 months after the events of January 6, 2021, and a month after testifying that her recollection was no better than saying President Trump hypothetically potentially said that maybe perhaps he agreed with the rioters' chants, Hutchinson suddenly recalled specific details of the alleged conversation between Meadows, Cipollone, and Hirschman. In Hutchinson's words, 136, it is noteworthy that the drastic change in Hutchinson's story occurred after Representative Cheney directed Hutchinson to fire her attorney and hire counsel that Representative Cheney suggested. Hutchinson did not think this incident was worth mentioning during the first 2 interviews, nor in conversation with her attorney, nor in conversation with her closest friends. 137. Unfortunately for Hutchinson and the Select Committee's narrative, Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee recovered the transcript of the Select Committee interview of a White House employee who was near the president for the majority of January 6, 2021, and who reliably testified to the president's actions throughout this specific period of time. 138. His eyewitness testimony directly contradicts Hutchinson's third-hand account. In his words, 36. This individual was within earshot of President Trump the entire time the president was in the president's dining room. Additionally, in its investigation, the subcommittee spoke with numerous individuals who worked closely with Meadows in the White House, and they confirmed that Meadows would not react apathetically to calls for violence, nor repeat an incident like the one alleged by Hutchinson so carelessly in a public space. The Select Committee did not thoroughly investigate Hutchinson's allegation against President Trump. The Select Committee only interviewed Hirschman one time on April 6, 2022, and did not ask Hirschman about President Trump's reaction to the chance to hang Mike Pence. 141. The Select Committee did not re-interview Hirschman to verify Hutchinson's claims. Cipollone, on the other hand, was interviewed on July 8, 2022. He stated that he viewed those chants as outrageous, and when asked if he recalled a contrary view expressed within the White House, Cipollone replied, I don't have a clear recollection, of contrary views on that personally. 142. It is clear that the Select Committee relied on Hutchinson's version of events alone, an account based on a conversation that hypothetically, potentially, maybe perhaps happened, despite her inconsistent testimony and the overwhelming weight of contrary evidence. Again, Vice Chair Cheney and the Select Committee put narrative over truth. Finding 4, Cassidy Hutchinson falsely claimed to have drafted a handwritten note for President Trump on January 6. Perhaps one of the more bizarre fabrications Cassidy Hutchinson submitted to the Select Committee was her claim that she wrote a note for President Trump relating to the events at the Capitol, when the note clearly was not written by her. While the riot was happening at the Capitol, the Select Committee again tried to portray President Trump as apathetic, that the joint session had paused due to the violence. This claim was never substantiated by the Select Committee. It appears that Hutchinson took credit for writing a note to President Trump to help bolster the Select Committee's narrative. However, Hutchinson's authorship came under immediate scrutiny following her live public hearing. The subcommittee retained an independent certified handwriting expert to review the handwriting of the note, and the expert confirmed that Hutchinson's story is not true. While the note in and of itself is not wholly critical to the events of January 6, it demonstrates another example of Hutchinson presenting easily refutable testimony to the Select Committee, and the Select Committee accepting her fabrications as truth. Cassidy Hutchinson testified at her public hearing on July 28, 2022, that the note in question was written in her handwriting. Then Hutchinson claims that Meadows dictated the word illegally, then attorney Eric Hirschman dictated the words without proper authority, 145, and then Hutchinson claims to have written both phrases, 146. This excerpt from Hutchinson's public testimony illustrates her confidence in her claim of authorship. Ms. Cheney, have you seen this note before? Ms. Hutchinson, that is a note that I wrote at the direction of the Chief of Staff on January 6th, likely around 3 o'clock. Ms. Cheney, and it's written on a Chief of Staff note card. But that is your handwriting, Ms. Hutchinson? Ms. Hutchinson, that is my handwriting. Ms. Cheney, and why did you write this note? Ms. Hutchinson, the Chief of Staff was in a meeting with Eric Hirschman, potentially Mr. Philbin, and they had rushed out of the office fairly quickly. Mark had handed me the note card with one of his pens and sort of dictating a statement for the president to potentially put out. Ms. Cheney, and no, I am sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Hutchinson. No, that is okay. There were 2 phrases on there, one illegal and one without properly authority. The illegal phrase was the one that Mr. Meadows had dictated to me. Mr. Hirschman had chimed in and said also put without legal authority. There should have been a slash between the 2 phrases. It was an or if the president had opted to put one of those statements out. Evidently didn't. Later that afternoon, Mark came back from the Oval Dining Room and put the palm card on my desk with illegally crossed out, but said we didn't need to take further action on that statement. 39, 147. The note in question appears below, written on Chief of Staff letterhead. 148. The Select Committee accepted her testimony and accredited Hutchinson with its authorship in its final report, based on He Committee's review alone. 149. Immediately following Hutchinson's testimony, however, Hirschman publicly refuted her claim. 150, he has consistently maintained that he is the true author of this note. Inexplicably, the Select Committee did not contact him to confirm, nor did it seek a writing sample for comparison. Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee obtained a multitude of writing samples from both Hutchinson and Hirschman. First, Hutchinson's sample, 151, compared with a few samples of Hirschman's handwriting. In the interest of identifying the true author, the subcommittee contracted with an independent certified handwriting expert to verify the note's authorship. The expert conclusively confirmed that the note Hutchinson attested to writing in a public congressional hearing did not belong to Hutchinson, but rather that Hirschman authored the note. From the handwriting expert's report, 153, 154. In addition to Hutchinson's dishonesty about this note, it is important to recognize that this is yet another example of the Select Committee relying on evidence it knew, or had reason to know was untrue, likely due to Eric Hirschman's passionate pushback against Hutchinson's claims and the visible difference between Hutchinson's handwriting and the note in question. The Select Committee included a footnote in its final report stating, "Who wrote the note is not material to the Select Committee." Hutchinson testified to a fact that was patently untrue. The Select Committee empowered and promoted her falsehood, and at the end of its investigation, the Select Committee published its final report propped up by these unsubstantiated claims. Finding 5, President Trump did not have intelligence indicating violence on the morning of January 6. The Select Committee relied on Hutchinson to make the claim that President Trump ignored briefings from his security team the morning of January 6, 2021, and continued with the plan to hold his rally at the White House ellipse. 156, however, the subcommittee has not uncovered any evidence to support this claim. Hutchinson claimed that Tony Ornato told her that he had briefed President Trump about security concerns the morning of January 6, 157. However, in sworn testimony, Ornato expressly refuted Hutchinson's claim and testified that it was not his job to brief the president. 158, Ornato went further to say that he could not have briefed the president on risks of violence, because he himself was not aware of any risk of violence on the morning of January 6. 159, in spite of this key contradictory evidence, the Select Committee printed this claim. 42. In its final report directly refuted by Ornato, the alleged source, and promoted Hutchinson's account as fact. 160 from the Select Committee's report. 161. Tony Ornato's November 2022 interview with the Select Committee contradicted this claim. 162. If the Select Committee sought to investigate and report on the security failures leading up to the events of January 6, 2021, it is unclear why it continued to rely on Hutchinson's unverified allegations. As with the majority of her allegations, the source Hutchinson cited categorically denied the factual basis of her story. President Trump was not briefed on the risk of violence on the morning of January 6th, and certainly not by Tony Ornato. Finding 6, Cassidy Hutchinson lied about the classification status of documents to disparage Mark Meadows. In her book, Cassidy Hutchinson claimed that in the final days of the Trump administration, Mark Meadows gave binders related to Crossfire Hurricane, the code name for the FBI's political investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, to a media organization. It is worth noting that Crossfire Hurricane, which later became the Mueller report, concluded that there was no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Due to the partisan nature of this investigation, Meadows and President Trump wanted to allow journalists to review the documents associated with this investigation and allow the American public to have access to the truth, and in particular, access to information regarding the actions of certain FBI agents. Meadows cleared the documents for release through all of the appropriate agencies, and only then allowed journalist John Solomon to review the documents at the White House on January 19, 2021. 164. After this discussion and review of documents, Solomon's staff picked up physical copies of the report that evening to begin the process of scanning and uploading the documents for release. 165. However, in the middle of this scanning operation, the Department of Justice contacted Meadows, who contacted Solomon, to inform them that it had overlooked a small number of Privacy Act redaction and that the documents needed to be returned. 166. Solomon promptly complied with this request and was told that he would receive an updated copy of the materials before the end of the administration, at noon on January 20th, 2021. 167. Cassidy Hutchinson's recollection of the event varies significantly from the evidence. Her version, though entirely uncorroborated, states that Meadows gave these documents to Solomon and Molly Hemingway, another journalist, while he knew they were still classified. 168. The implication of Hutchinson's account is clear. Meadows, with his extensive experience handling classified information, violated a series of laws to distribute classified information under President Trump's direction, despite the obvious trail that would lead back to himself. Hutchinson's account goes as follows, through her story of a conversation with Deputy Counsel to President Trump, Pat Philbin, 44. 169. However, this implication is demonstrably false. On January 19, 2021, President Trump signed a declassification order allowing the Crossfire Hurricane binders to be declassified to the maximum extent possible. 170, Solomon has stated in court proceedings that he saw the declassification order before reviewing the documents at the White House and has a copy of the order in his possession. See the report in the Federal Register. The most likely explanation for Hutchinson's erroneous recollection is that she was ignorant to the facts underlying the classification status of the Crossfire Hurricane documents, and she allowed her perception of the situation to convince her that what she perceived to be true about the documents was, in fact, the truth. The subcommittee was unable to interview Hutchinson, and therefore it was unable to identify how many other times Hutchinson, in fact, testified to events based on her limited, erroneous perception in her sworn testimony. Finding 7. Representative Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson attempted to disbar Stefan Passantino after Hutchinson switched attorneys at Representative Cheney's direction. The Select Select Committee needed to shore up Hutchinson's credibility as a witness and explain away her ever-changing testimony. To do this, the Select Committee created a narrative that would make Pasantino the scapegoat. They manufactured the story that Pasantino gave Hutchinson faulty advice, such as instructing Hutchinson to withhold information, to misrepresent her testimony, and even that Pasantino implied he would help Hutchinson with future employment in return for favorable testimony. Contrary to the Select Committee's and Hutchinson's narrative, however, the subcommittee obtained messages between Alyssa Farah Griffin and Hutchinson, where Hutchinson admits that Pasantino was acting in her best interest and that she agreed with his counsel. 7. The subcommittee has reason to believe that the Select Committee coordinated with the Washington, D.C. Bar Association to file an ethics complaint against Pasantino. The Select Committee did this by using the content of its not-yet-public report to accuse Pasantino of instructing Hutchinson to lie to congressional investigators, sharing information about her testimony with the press over her objections, sharing information about her testimony with other attorneys, and not disclosing who was paying the bill for her representation. This complaint, reviewed by the subcommittee, was finalized by the D.C. Bar and sent to Pasantino the same day the Select Committee's nearly 900-page report was published. All bar ethics complaints against Pasantino was ultimately dismissed, and he was cleared of all of the allegations lodged against him. This episode further demonstrates Hutchinson's willingness to create a false public record that contradicts the truth. Finding 8, Cassidy Hutchinson misrepresented President Trump's actions at Lafayette Square Park in the summer of 2020. In addition to Cassidy Hutchinson's allegations about the events of January 6, 2021, Hutchinson wrote false statements in her book about the events at Lafayette Square Park on June 1, 2020. In her book, Hutchinson states that President Trump, motivated by his anger, a crackdown on the Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters in Lafayette Park prior to visiting historic St. John's Church. 174. The subcommittee has recovered several interviews performed by the Select Committee that all contradict Hutchinson's version of events. 175. Cassidy Hutchinson alleged that President Trump ordered law enforcement to clear Lafayette Square Park of protesters. In her words, the majority of whom were exercising their First Amendment right to free speech. Her statement contains 2 important errors. First, many of the protesters in Washington, D.C. who occupied Lafayette Square Park had engaged in arson, vandalism, looting, and had assaulted police officers for several days leading up to June 1, 2020. 178 the night before, on May 31, 2020, 61 United States Park police officers and 7 D.C. police officers were injured, with 3 Park police officers hospitalized. 179, 2 officers were struck by bricks and 1 required surgery. 180, the protesters who were continually encamped near the walls of the White House and Lafayette Square Park created a hazard to all White House employees and Washington, D.C. residents in the area. 181. The violence reached its peak the night of May 31st, 2020, and early into the next morning, when protesters set several buildings that border the White House ablaze. 182. St. John's Episcopal Church, which stands directly across Lafayette Square Park from the White House, was set on fire that night as well. 183. The multi-agency law enforcement response to these attacks was predictable and inevitable, but Hutchinson pushed the false claim that President Trump ordered law enforcement to infringe upon peaceful protesters' rights, just so he could give a speech and pose for a photograph. Cassidy Hutchinson's second baseless claim, that President Trump gave the order to law enforcement to clear Lafayette Square Park for personal gain, was thoroughly debunked by the Department of the Interior Inspector General. 185 in its report following the law enforcement response to the violent riots at Lafayette Square Park, the DOI IG states the following. 49. 186. The report asserts that there is no evidence that USPP cleared the protesters to allow President Trump to make an appearance, and that USPP officers were instead clearing space for contractors to put up fencing in response to the extensive property damage prior to June 1st, 2020. 187. Additionally, USPP were not made aware of President Trump's potential movement to the area until hours after USPP's plan was already in action. 188, the DOI IG reaffirmed in its report that USPP retained the authority and discretion necessary to clear the area of any protesters without the need to consult with the White House. 189. In addition to the DOI IG, Robert Engel, the leader of President Trump's Secret Service detail on June 1st, 2020, testified to the Select Committee that there was no discussion of President Trump going to Lafayette Square Park prior to June 1st, 2020. 190, he stated that the desire to make an appearance originated the morning of June 1st during President Trump's briefing on the many Black Lives Matter protests across the country. 191. Cassidy Hutchinson's account in her book represents a false record of the events at Lafayette Square Park. She maliciously attempts to place blame on President Trump for the violent interactions between law enforcement and protesters. 192. Conclusion. As the Select Committee's star witness, Hutchinson's testimony formed the basis of the Select Committee's false, but most enduring claims against President Trump. Without Hutchinson's altered testimony, it is unlikely the Select Committee could make its assertions about President Trump's mood, attitude, and alleged culpability in the events of January 6. Hutchinson is mentioned by name in the Select Committee's final report no fewer than 185 times. Inexplicably, the Select Committee discredited the multitude of legitimate witnesses who, under 50 oath, repeatedly refuted Hutchinson's testimony. These legitimate witnesses include senior government officials and federal agents. As we now know, the Select Committee failed to do its due diligence to verify Hutchinson's radical claims before featuring her testimony on national television during the primetime slot, going so far as to schedule an emergency hearing to get her claims into public discourse before allowing any credible source to refute them. For example, Hutchinson's story about President Trump reaching for the steering wheel and attacking his Secret Service detail appears for the first time in her fourth interview with the Select Committee on June 20th, 2022. Between her fourth interview and her public testimony on June 28, only 1 week later, the Select Committee did not conduct any on-the-record interviews with the three alleged witnesses who could corroborate this story, instead choosing to rely entirely on Hutchinson's third-hand account. According to a profile done on the Select Committee, ACH hearing was preceded by at least 2 rehearsals held in the Cannon Caucus Room on evenings or weekends. Each monologue was timed with a stopwatch. 193. Every part of the Select Committee's hearings was meticulously planned and executed, except for Hutchinson's. Chair Thompson and Representative Cheney gave the other members of the Select Committee only 3 hours' notice before holding Hutchinson's hearing. The evidence is overwhelming that the Select Committee violated House rules, deleted documents in the final days of the 117th Congress, and had a predetermined, partisan outcome it was committed to convey, regardless of the facts. The Select Committee's blatant disregard for the truth and Hutchinson's false statements, accepted by the Select Committee as fact, erode all credibility of the Select Committee's final report. Recovered documents. The Select Committee proactively took measures to prevent the public and congressional Republicans from accessing a substantial amount of material in contravention of House rules. 194. This includes all video recordings of hundreds of interviews, transcripts of several key interviews, and several terabytes of data. In addition to deleting data, the Select Committee effectively concealed many vital interviews from subsequent congressional committees by giving custody of those transcripts to the executive agencies like the Department of Homeland Security. And instead of archiving those transcripts with the clerk of the House as mandated by House rules, the Select Committee deleted its copies of those transcripts. 196. Because of this decision, it took the subcommittee several months to recover copies of those transcripts from DHS, and when the documents were finally delivered, they were incomplete and contained significant redactions. The Select Committee's efforts to conceal those records from later congressional review led to predictable and unnecessary delays. The subcommittee, in long-standing negotiations with the White House and DHS, recovered 17 transcribed interview transcripts that the Select Committee failed to archive, in clear violation of House rules. 197. These transcripts included United States Secret Service agents and other White House employees. Many of these transcripts directly refute the narrative told by the Select Committee, yet they were never archived. Additionally, the Select Committee did not conduct most of these interviews until November 2022, after Democrats lost their majority in Congress. These transcripts encompassed agents in proximity to President Trump, Vice President Pence, Chief of Staff Meadows, and the Intelligence and Operations Divisions of the Secret Service. The subcommittee recovered the following transcripts of interviews conducted by the Select Committee of United States Secret Service agents, while started 320. There are 4 agents who are under GS-14, and therefore their names and certain identifying information will remain redacted to protect their privacy. Their names are not relevant to the role they played on January 6, 2021. The subcommittee recovered additional transcripts from the Select Committee's transcribed interviews of White House employees, each of whom will remain anonymous to protect their privacy. These transcribed interviews were released as part of the subcommittee's initial findings report in March 2024. At the end of every Congress, committees, including select committees, must archive relevant committee materials with the clerk of the House. 199. These materials include transcripts, exhibits, depositions, communications from stakeholders, press files, reports, research files, document production, executive branch communications, and a number of other materials. 200. The clerk of the House then holds on to these records for 4 years before then transmitting them to the National Archives and Records Administration. 201. However, Representative Cheney, in her book Oath and Honor, attempts to rewrite history by willfully misrepresenting the role of the Select Committee in archiving these transcripts. 202. The Select Committee, by asking for the timely return of documents, implies that Representative Cheney, who signed the letter to DHS, understood these are House-created documents. Additionally, designation of instructions for proper handling by the archives understands that it is the job of the House to transmit these documents to NARA, not DHS itself. In yet another example of manipulating the details to paint herself in the best light, Representative Cheney tried to put the onus on DHS to transmit these documents to NARA. Yet DHS cannot transmit House documents on behalf of the House. Once again, Representative Cheney demonstrated that she was trying to hide this evidence in the executive branch to prevent it from ever contradicting her predetermined narrative against President Trump. The Select Committee also used these unarchived transcripts as sources in their final report. The Select Committee touted its research, but it did not release the transcripts that directly refute its narrative. This is indicative of deliberate deception. See below for a citation for one of the missing DHS transcripts, 204. The Select Committee justified releasing some transcripts over others based on inconsistent standards. The Select Committee believed Mr. Ornato's November 2022 transcript addressed a range of intelligence information important to the committee's conclusions about January 6th, 205, but did not the transcript of the interview of Secret Service Director of Communications, Anthony Guglielmi. Both Ornato's and the Guglielmi's testimonies contained relatively equivalent levels of sensitive national security information, but the likely because 5. Guglielmi's testimony refutes Hutchinson's claims much more directly. His interview was never published by the Select Committee. From his testimony, 206. It is also worth considering that the Select Committee may have only released Ornato's November 2022 interview transcript to make it seem like it was Hutchinson's word against Ornato's. In reality, it was the driver, Engel, Ornato, Guglielmi, and the lead transportation agent's collective word against Hutchinson's. Evidence of collusion between Special Counsel Jack Smith and President Trump's adversaries. Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee have uncovered evidence of collusion between the Special Counsel Jack Smith, the prosecutor appointed by Attorney General General Merrick Garland to conduct 2 separate criminal investigations into President Trump in either the White, 26, House, or the Select Committee. On October 18, 2024, Special Counsel Smith released some of the documents used in his filing against President Trump. Among the released documents was an unredacted version of the transcript of a Select Committee interview with a certain White House employee. 209 given that the Select Committee did not archive or otherwise destroyed this transcript, and that the White House refused to provide an unredacted version to the subcommittee. The only remaining explanation is that Special Counsel Smith received the unredacted version from one of the 2 institutions which did not cooperate fully with the subcommittee. Uncovered HBO video footage. In 2022, Home Box Office Inc. released a documentary film, Pelosi in the House, focused on the life and career of Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. This documentary film was directed and produced by Alexandra Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi's daughter. The documentary includes footage of Speaker Pelosi and members of House and Senate leadership after being evacuated from the Capitol complex on January 6, 2021. The Select Committee was in possession of Alexandra Pelosi's footage throughout their investigation. However, the Select Committee did not publicly release any of the video, and furthermore did not archive this footage at the end of the 117th Congress, or hand it over when Republicans took the majority in the House of Representatives in 2023. Despite attempts to conceal the footage, Chairman Lodermilk secured various clips from HBO containing candid details regarding the events and individuals at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. On May 23, 2024, Chairman Lodermilk wrote to HBO requesting any footage related to the security failures that occurred on January 6, 2021. 210, and on June 6, 2024, HBO produced 41 video files to the subcommittee. Upon receiving the video production from HBO, Chairman Lodermilk submitted another request for all raw, unedited footage from January 6 and January 7th. 211, on August 23, 2024. HBO produced 27 additional video files. 212. The footage, which the Select Committee chose to conceal from public release, contains shocking new information regarding Speaker Pelosi's movements and communication on January 6, 2021. In one clip, while being evacuated from the Capitol, Speaker Pelosi takes responsibility for the lack of security at the U.S. Capitol. In a very panicked exchange, Speaker Pelosi admits to her Chief of Staff, Terry McCullough, that they bear responsibility for not having adequate security measures established, specifically the National Guard, before the demonstrators breached the Capitol. 58. We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with? They thought that they had sufficient resources. No, it's not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know. And I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more. Prior to January 6, 2021, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief was required by law to receive approval from the Capitol Police Board before directly requesting assistance from the D.C. National Guard. 213. This requirement caused significant delays in the deployment of the National Guard and therefore delayed law enforcement's efforts to secure the Capitol. The recorded admission by Speaker Pelosi, outlined above, is only one example of the video footage shot by Alexandra Pelosi, which provides new insight into the details of the security failures at the U.S. Capitol and helps to answer the larger question of what happened on January 6, 2021. Other instances of the HBO footage secured by the subcommittee throughout its investigation are discussed in other chapters of this report. All HBO video footage obtained by the subcommittee can be found here, the Department of Defense. The Committee on House Administration Subcommittee on Oversight has conducted an exhaustive investigation into the Department of Defense's response to the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Regrettably, the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol only included the National Guard's role in the response as Appendix 1 to their 845-page final report. However, the subcommittee maintains that the D.C. National Guard delay in quelling the violence at the Capitol is central to understanding the major security failures that occurred on January 6, 2021, as well as adequately responding to an attack of this magnitude in the future. At 12:53 p.m. on January 6, 2021, the first breach of the United States Capitol Police perimeter occurred at the west front of the Capitol, 215 at 2. 3:06 p.m., USCP Chief Stephen Sund urgently requested National Guard support during a conference call with senior Pentagon officials, city government officials, and D.C. National Guard senior leadership, including Major General William Walker. 216. However, the DCNG, also known as the Capitol Guardians, 217 were not immediately authorized to respond. Although ready to go, the DCNG sat on buses only 1.8 miles from the U.S. Capitol as they waited for the Pentagon to communicate the necessary deployment order. Sadly, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy would not approve the DCNG's movement to the Capitol until after 5 p.m. on January 6, 2021. 2 hours and 42 minutes after USCP's initial request on the 2:30 p.m. call, 154 D.C. Guardsmen arrived at the Capitol to support USCP at 5:20 p.m. The subcommittee has uncovered evidence that senior Department of Defense and Pentagon officials were responsible for the significant and intentional delay in approving the DCNG deployment to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, despite directions from the Commander-in-Chief to use military assets to prevent violence. Furthermore, the Department of Defense Inspector General failed to adequately investigate and evaluate the DoD's role in responding to the crisis at the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. The DoD IG published a flawed report in November 2021. Review of the DoD's role, responsibilities, and actions to prepare for and respond to the protests and its aftermath at the U.S. Capitol campus on January 6, 2021, to construct an inaccurate narrative of the Pentagon's delay on January 6, and therefore permanently alter the historical. 215 U.S. Capitol Police, timeline of events for January 6, 2021 attack 11. 216 D.C. National Guard, memorandum for the wreck from Joint Force Headquarters 2. 217 Heritage, District of Columbia National Guard. 218 D.C. National Guard, memorandum for the record from Joint Force Headquarters 4. 61, record. 219. The DoD IG report construes a narrative that absolves Pentagon officials of any culpability or wrongdoing and blames the D.C. National Guard for the delay in responding to the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The subcommittee's investigation was further informed by D.C. National Guardsmen who were heavily involved in the January 6, 2021 response, but were denied a platform to share information by the DoD Inspector General. The subcommittee has developed the following findings. Finding 1. The Acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, dismissed President Trump's January 3, 2021 order to use any and all military assets necessary to ensure safety for the planned demonstrations on January 6, 2021. Finding 2. The Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, intentionally delayed the D.C. National Guard response to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Although approved by the Secretary of Defense at 3:04 p.m., Secretary McCarthy delayed and failed to communicate deployment orders to the Commanding General of the D.C. National Guard. Finding 3, at 3:18 p.m. on January 6, 2021, Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, deliberately deceived congressional leaders by stating that D.C. National Guard was physically moving to the Capitol, with full knowledge these forces had yet to receive any orders. These false statements contributed to decisions made by congressional leaders regarding the security response to the Capitol. Finding 4, the Department of Defense Inspector General published a flawed report that contains fabricated information, ignores crucial information, fails to interview key individuals, and appears to have collaborated with DoD to portray a false narrative. Finding 5, DoD and DoD knowingly and inaccurately placed blame on D.C. National Guard leadership for the delayed DoD response. Finding 6, DoD IG was not responsive to the subcommittee's requests, and at times obstructed the subcommittee's work. The subcommittee has detected an inappropriately close relationship between the DoD Inspector General and DoD, which compromises the Inspector General's ability to conduct objective oversight. The District of Columbia National Guard. The DCNG was founded in 1802 by President Thomas Jefferson to defend the newly created capital city. 220, it is comprised of more than 2,700 soldiers and airmen to provide mission-ready personnel in times of war or national emergency. 221. Unlike the National Guard units in the 50 states and 3 territories, where deployment authority rests with those jurisdictions, the DCNG maintains a unique chain of command. The DCNG is the only National Guard unit that reports directly to the President. 222, however, Executive Order 11,485, signed in October 1969, delegates this authority to the Secretary of Defense. This delegation from the President authorizes and directs the Secretary of Defense to supervise, administer, and control the DCNG. 224, a Secretary of Defense memorandum further delegates operational control of the DCNG to the Secretary of the Army. 225, these delegations, were in place on January 6, 2021, and were relied upon by DoD officials to establish a chain of command for the deployment of the DCNG. On January 6, 2021, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy maintained approval authority for the deployment of the DCNG, District of Columbia National Guard Command Authority. The DCNG's primary federal and state missions include supporting national security, significant events, and civil disturbance across Washington, D.C. According to their own website, the DCNG retains the mission as protector of the District of Columbia. 228 in June 2020. A statement released by the DoD touted the DCNG as the first choice in response to civil unrest and commended them on their response to the major protests across Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2020. Governors in 28 states have called on the National Guard to support first responders in the wake of civil unrest and protests across the nation following the death of George Floyd. 4. In the U.S., more than 67,000 National Guard soldiers and airmen are supporting operations in every single state, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia, the official said, noting that this represents the largest domestic response since Hurricane Katrina. 229. Furthermore, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy was intimately aware of the DCNG's civil disturbance capabilities. Prior to January 6, 2021, on May 31, 2020, Secretary McCarthy visited the D.C. Armory to inspect the DCNG alongside Major General Walker and thank service members for their role in responding to civil disturbance in Washington, D.C. Secretary McCarthy also commended the 113th Wing D.C. Air National Guard for their work in June of 2020. Subcommittee findings. Finding 1, the Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller dismissed President Trump's January 3, 2021 order to use any and all military assets necessary to ensure safety for the planned demonstrations on January 6, 2021. On January 3, 2021, Acting Secretary Miller and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley met with President Trump at the White House. 232 Acting Secretary Miller and Chairman Milley have both testified that, although the purpose of the meeting was unrelated to the events of January 6, President Trump asked both senior Pentagon officials about the safety precautions for the planned demonstrations on January 6, 2021. 233. The DoD IG interviewed Chairman Milley twice in April of 2021. 234 in his testimony to the DoD IG, Chairman Milley shared specific details of the January 3, 2021 meeting with President Trump. The president just says, hey, look at this. It's going to be a large amount of protesters coming here on the 6th, and make sure that you have sufficient National Guard or soldiers to make sure it's a safe event. And Miller responds by saying, hey, we've got a plan, and we've got it covered. And that's about it. 235. Chairman Milley revealed to the DOD IG that in the January 3rd, 2021 meeting, President Trump gave the order to make sure it's a safe event when referring to the planned demonstrations on January 6th, 2021. 236. Acting Secretary Miller replied to President Trump's concerns with, we've got a plan, and we've got it covered. 237. Chairman Milley provided further details to the DOD IG, stating, again, that President Trump ordered his top military officials to use any and all military assets to guarantee safety throughout the planned events of January 6, 2021. During the same meeting on January 3rd, 2021, the president said, I want 10,000 troops. And that led to this whole kind of controversy about Insurrection Act and so on, which ultimately leads to Secretary Esper being fired. In the meeting on the 3rd of January, there was no discussion to my recollection. And I'm sitting there and I'm paying close attention to all of this stuff. There was no discussion of 10,000 troops. It was just what I just described, which was, hey, I don't care if you use Guard or soldiers, active duty soldiers, do whatever you have to do. Just make sure it's safe. 238. The following day, on January 4th, 2021, Acting Secretary Miller approved a request from D.C. Mayor Bowser for National Guard assistance at traffic control points on January 5 to 6, 2021. On January 4th, Acting Secretary Miller issued the employment guidance for the District of Columbia National Guard memorandum to his Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, who is next in the chain of command for the DCNG. 240th. Acting Secretary Miller's January 4 memo established significant restrictions and control measures for the DCNG and its deployment requested by Mayor Bowser on January 5, 6, 2021. 66. XXX. Without my subsequent personal approval authorization, the DCNG is not authorized the following: to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic protection equipment such as helmets or body armor. To interact physically with protesters, except when necessary in self-defense or defense of others, consistent with the DCNG rules for the use of force. XX. To employ any riot control agents, to share equipment with law enforcement agencies. X, to use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, or to conduct ISR or incident awareness and assessment activities. X, to employ helicopters or any other air assets. X, to conduct searches or seizures, arrests, or other similar direct law enforcement activity. 67. X, to seek support from any non-DCNG National Guard units. 241. Acting Secretary Miller published his January 4 memo to approve use of the National Guard the day after his January 3 meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office, where in response to the Commander-in-Chief's directive to use Guard or soldiers, active duty soldiers, do whatever you have to do. Just make sure it's safe, replies, we've got a plan and we've got it covered. On March 12, 2021, the DOD IG interviewed Acting Secretary Miller. 242, Acting Secretary Miller was asked by the DOD IG if he ever thought that, DOD might need to do something at the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6, and Acting Secretary Miller responded that the operational plan was this: let's take the D.C. National Guard, keep them away from the Capitol. 243. His testimony to the DOD IG indicates that he ignored and dismissed the Commander-in-Chief's order to use any military assets necessary to make sure January 6, 2021 is a safe event. Acting Secretary Miller further stated to the DOD IG, there is absolutely no way I was putting us. Military forces at the Capitol. 245. As he was concerned, it may provoke the greatest constitutional crisis probably since the Civil War. 246. Acting Secretary Miller's statements reveal that his decision-making rationale for deploying the DCNG was influenced by media stories suggesting that he was a Trump crony. He was also concerned about online narratives in the Twitter sphere, as opposed to following orders from the Commander-in-Chief. Miller testifies to DOD IG. Then you had this constant drumbeat of, remember when I came in, the story was that I was a stuffed suit, that I was a Trump crony that was going to use the United States military to conduct a military coup to overthrow the government, the elected government of the United States. So that is what was out there in the Twitter sphere. 249. 68. I knew if the morning of the 6th or prior, if we put U.S. military personnel on the Capitol, I would have created, go ahead, the greatest constitutional crisis probably since the Civil War. Furthermore, on January 3, 2021, Representative Cheney, who would become the vice chair of the Select Committee, orchestrated a Washington Post op-ed which was signed by all 10 living former secretaries of defense. 251. Acting Secretary Miller would cite this article as another variable in his decision-making process for approval of the D.C. National Guard. 10 former secretaries of defense, whatever week that was before, write a letter to the Washington Post. Basically, a letter to those of us in the Department of Defense cautioning that they were concerned that I was going to use the United States military in a way antithetical to the Constitution. So we had those elements going on. On January 14, 2022, Acting Secretary Miller was interviewed again by the Select Committee. When asked about the January 3, 2021 meeting at the White House, Miller dismissed President Trump's concerns as President Trump banter and refers to President Trump's comments as throwaway lines. 254. But did he stay out of it in these meetings with you? Did he raise the issue with you? Oh, the president's the president. He probably had some throwaway lines, but nothing. Beyond banter, it was just throwaway comments. I interpreted it as a bit of presidential banter, a President Trump banter that you are all familiar with, and in no way, shape, or form did I interpret that as an order or direction. 256. The above statements from Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller to the DOD IG and the Select Committee revealed that President Trump instructed the highest-ranking Pentagon official to use any and all military assets to ensure safety 3 days prior to January 6, 2021. The acting Secretary of Defense concedes that external variables, such as the Twitter sphere accusation of being a Trump crony in Representative Cheney's op-ed, weighed on his mind as he determined how and whether to employ the National Guard on January 6, 2021. During this period of time, Acting Secretary Miller published his January 4 memo with significant restrictions and control measures on the DCNG. To date, no investigation or disciplinary action has taken place against Acting Secretary of Defense Miller for his failure to follow directives from the sitting Commander-in-Chief on January 3, 2021. In fact, the DoD IG report concludes that the decisions made by Mr. Miller and actions taken by the DoD in response to the civil disturbance at the U.S. Capitol campus on January 6, 2021 were reasonable in light of the circumstances. The DoD IG report also looked for a role or responsibility for the DoD to act preemptively to prevent or deter what later happened at the Capitol, and we found none. Two-headed watchdog failed to examine or consider the January 3, 2021 directives from President Trump, which Acting Secretary of Defense Miller and Chairman Milley confirmed in sworn testimony as adequate evidence that DoD should have played a role in preventing the breach of the Capitol building on January 6, 2021. Finding 2, the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, intentionally delayed the D.C. National Guard response to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Although approved by the Secretary of Defense at 3:04 p.m., Secretary McCarthy delayed and failed to communicate deployment orders to the Commanding General of the D.C. National Guard. After Acting Secretary of Defense Miller gave approval to employ the DCNG via his January 4 memo, Secretary of the Army McCarthy conveyed the approval down the chain of command to Major General Walker. On January 5, 2021, Secretary of the Army McCarthy authored a memorandum addressed to General Walker, which included the same restrictions as Secretary Miller's January 4 memo, such as withholding authorization for DCNG to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, and batons, and interact physically with protesters. 259. However, Secretary McCarthy established an additional restriction of withholding employment of a 40-man quick reaction force until a concept of operations plan is submitted to the Secretary. I withhold authority to approve employment of the DCNG quick reaction force and will do so only as a last resort in response to a request from AN 220, appropriate civil authority. I will require a concept of operation prior to authorizing employment of the QRF. If the QRF is employed, DCNG personnel will be clearly marked and/or distinguished from civilian law enforcement personnel. 261. Major General Walker, Commanding General of the DCNG on January 6, described these changes in approval authorization and additional control measures as unusual in his testimony to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and Senate Rules Committees on March 3, 2021, 262. The Secretary of the Army's January 5th letter withheld authority for me to employ the Quick Reaction Force. In addition, the Secretary of the Army's memorandum to me required that a concept of operation be submitted to him before any employment of the QRF. I found that requirement to be unusual, as was the requirement to seek approval to move guardsmen supporting MPD to move from one traffic control point to another. 263. Secretary McCarthy included this requirement for a concept of operation prior to authorizing employment of the QRF in his January 5 memo, reserving complete control and responsibility for the deployment of the DCNG. 264. Although Acting Secretary Miller delegated the ability to employ the DCNG Quick Reaction Force down the chain of command, Secretary McCarthy did not delegate this responsibility to Major General Walker. Secretary McCarthy withheld this authority from Major General Walker to deploy his DC Guardsmen, including the QRF. These changes in approval authorization and 71. Additional restrictions imposed on the DCNG limited their ability to respond rapidly to an emergency at the Capitol on January 6. Moreover, the DoD's pre-January 6, 2021 restrictions, which modified approval authorities, counter the spirit and intent of long-established DoD defense support for civil authorities directives. 266. The DoD's DCSA Directive 3025.18 explicitly states that under immediate response authority, in response to a request for assistance from a civil authority, under imminently serious conditions, and if the time does not permit approval from higher authority, DoD officials may provide an immediate response by temporarily employing the resources under their control, subject to any supplemental direction provided by higher headquarters to save lives, prevent human suffering, or mitigate great property damage within the United States. The DoD's DCSA Directive 3025.18 explicitly states that under emergency response authority. In these circumstances, those federal military commanders have the authority, in extraordinary emergency circumstances where prior authorization by the President is impossible and duly constituted local authorities are unable, to control the situation, to engage temporarily in activities that are necessary to quell large-scale, unexpected civil disturbances. Therefore, according to DoD's own policies, DCNG would ordinarily have the ability to rapidly respond to the large-scale, unexpected civil disturbance at the Capitol on January 6. But this ability was explicitly removed by the Acting Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army with the January 4 and January 5 memos. 269. These actions taken by Pentagon leadership led to the DoD's paralysis in response to the riot at the U.S. Capitol. The subcommittee concludes that these explicit control measures on the National Guard stem from both ill-advised, poor judgment by the Acting Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army, and DoD leadership's intent to prevent or limit the National Guard's ability to act on January 6. Furthermore, at approximately 2:30 p.m., during a teleconference with Pentagon officials and D.C. government officials, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Sund urgently requested National Guard support. 270. This call represented a verbal and urgent request for assistance from the USCP to the Pentagon. Although the purpose of the 2:30 p.m. call was to request the immediate support of the DCNG, Secretary McCarthy, whose permission was expressly required, declined to make himself available for the call. Participants on this call shockingly heard Secretary McCarthy's senior Army staff, Lieutenant General Pyatt and Major General Flynn, recommend denying the request for support, displaying a preoccupation with optics. 271. Despite the recommendation from Army leadership on this call to deny USCP's urgent RFA, Acting Secretary Miller approved and verbally communicated the RFA approval to Secretary McCarthy at 3:04 p.m. 272. Despite this approval, Secretary McCarthy failed to communicate the approval to DCNG. 273. The failure to communicate the order in a timely manner has never been addressed by either DoD or oversight bodies, including the Select Committee. The approval to deploy the DCNG was finally communicated in passing at 5:08 p.m. by Army Chief of Staff. 3. James McConville, when he observed that Major General Walker remained on the teleconference waiting for direction. The subcommittee has concluded that the reason for the delay was Secretary McCarthy's requirement for a CONOP. The CONOP requirement was inserted into Secretary McCarthy's January 5 memo, solely for DoD officials to control and restrict the timing and use of the DCNG. 275. While the CONOP was for the DCNG to support the USCP, neither entity was involved in the development. Additionally, DoD never produced a copy of the CONOP, nor was it ever seen by anyone to this day. The subcommittees found that an actual CONOP was never developed and was never communicated nor disseminated to anyone, demonstrating that the CONOP was never needed. DoD IG interviews of senior DoD officials indicate that the CONOP requirement for DCNG action was added because the Army was not familiar with the DCNG civil disturbance mission and capability. However, between May and September 2020, Secretary McCarthy received several briefings from DCNG leadership regarding DCNG capabilities and preparedness specifically for civil disturbances and witnessed the execution during the summer of 2020. Secretary McCarthy also witnessed DCNG rehearsals on civil disturbance operations. 276. Clearly, Secretary McCarthy knew the capabilities of the DCNG. At 3:48 p.m. on January 6, Secretary McCarthy left the Pentagon and drove to the Metropolitan Police Department's headquarters to meet with Mayor Bowser and draft the CONOP. 277. The fact that Secretary McCarthy went to MPD instead of USCP or DCNG's command centers illustrated that detailed planning of DCNG deployment was not needed. The Army's only requirement in responding to the USCP RFA was to provide the forces to the USCP as rapidly as possible. 278. If Secretary McCarthy wanted to be involved in the planning and employment of DCNG, he would have traveled to either the DCNG command center at the DC Armory or the USCP command center in accordance with the RFA. Relocating to MPD and claiming to produce a CONOP without the involvement of either the DCNG or the USCP is inconsistent with appropriate military planning. The subcommittee consulted DoD experts on the addition of the planning requirements days before January 6. It is the opinion of the subcommittee and these experts that the requirement 74. For a CONOP during the riot was an unreasonable burden and limited the DCNG's quick reaction capability. To date, no investigation or disciplinary action has taken place against Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy for his failure to relay the Acting Secretary of Defense's lawful deployment order at 3:04 p.m. on January 6, 2021. Finding 3 at 3:18 p.m. on January 6, 2021, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy deliberately deceived congressional leaders by stating that D.C. National Guard was physically moving to the Capitol. With full knowledge, these forces had yet to receive any orders. These false statements contributed to decisions made by congressional leaders regarding the security response to the Capitol. In June 2024, the subcommittee obtained unreleased video footage of January 6, 2021 from Home Box Office Inc. This was footage that was previously in possession of the Select Committee, but was not archived with the House of Representatives. The failure of the Select Committee Chair Benny Thompson to archive this footage was in violation of House Rule 7, which required the Select Committee to archive all non-current records, 280, and HRES 503 that required the transfer of all records of the Select Committee to the committee designated by the Speaker. 281, however, after months of negotiations with HBO and their parent company Warner Brothers, Chairman Lodermilk obtained some of this footage. 282. A short video clip shows Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer speaking to Secretary McCarthy at 3:18 p.m. on January 6, 2021 by phone. 283. While on the call with Secretary McCarthy, Leader Hoyer details the severity of the violence at the Capitol, stating, "There's a critical situation and a risk of loss of life." Senate Leader Schumer adds, "We have some senators who are still in their hideaways. They need massive personnel now. Can you get Maryland National Guard to come too?" As the elected officials implored the Secretary of the Army to provide any and all support immediately, 284 Secretary McCarthy deceivingly stated that National Guard forces are moving to the Capitol to respond. 285 Speaker Pelosi informed Secretary McCarthy that she is going to call 75 District of Columbia Mayor Muriel Bowser to share the good news that he is no longer blocking deployment of the DCNG. 286 Secretary McCarthy quickly replies, "Speaker, I never said no. I just had to get permission. It's not my personal authority. I had to talk to my boss." 287 Speaker Pelosi asked, "Did you talk to your boss?" To which Secretary McCarthy responded, "I did, yes. We have the green light. We are moving." 288. This footage contradicts Secretary McCarthy's own official timeline, as well as the official timelines published by the DoD and the DCNG, which each indicate that the DCNG were not notified to deploy to the Capitol until after 5 p.m. 289. Secretary McCarthy gave the impression to congressional leaders that military forces were physically on their way when he stated, "We are moving." In actuality, the DCNG were positioned at the DC Armory, waiting for authorization from Secretary McCarthy to deploy to the UES Capitol. The most troubling aspect of these misleading statements is that congressional leaders made decisions affecting the security of members of Congress and their staff, based on the information that the DCNG was en route to the Capitol at 3:18 p.m. To date, no investigation or disciplinary action has taken place against Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy for deceiving congressional leadership with false statements regarding the delay in deployment of the DC National Guard to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Finding 4, the Department of Defense Inspector General published a flawed report that contains fabricated information, ignores crucial information, fails to interview key individuals, and appears to have collaborated with DOD to portray a false narrative. The DOD IG's investigation into the events of January 6, 2021 failed to uphold the organization's stated values of independence, integrity, excellence, and transparency. 290. The DOD IG report that was commissioned to review DOD actions on January 6 contains errors and omissions that are intrinsically connected to its conclusion, warranting an immediate retraction and correction. On November 16, 2021, the DOD IG published report number 2022-039. This report, titled Review of the DOD's Role, Responsibilities, and Actions to Prepare for and Respond to the Protest and Its Aftermath at the U.S. Capitol Campus on January 6, 2021, contains factual inaccuracies and does not conduct any investigative analysis of several substantial events that led to the DOD's delayed response to the riot at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The report incorrectly absolves senior Army officers of any wrongdoing. Some of the more notable errors include X withholding critical information. The subcommittee found that the DOD IG did not publish certain information that would have contradicted the DOD IG report's final conclusions. DOD, DOD IG, and the Biden administration possessed information that exonerated President Trump. Based on the transcripts provided by the DOD IG to the subcommittee, Acting Secretary of Defense Miller dismissed an order from President Trump to ensure that the necessary security forces were ready for the events of January 6, 2021, during a meeting several days prior on January 3, 2021. DOD, DOD IG, and the Biden administration possessed information that the Secretary of the Army misled senior congressional leaders by stating that the DC 7 National Guard was on the way, with the knowledge that the DC National Guard was waiting for an order to deploy. X published misleading information. The DOD IG report overlooks conflicting accounts of critical communications between senior DOD officials, USCP, and DCNG, and lists instances of potential communication as fact, with no evidence that the communications or calls took place. Specifically, the DOD IG report suggests that Secretary McCarthy was on the phone with Major General Walker at several points throughout the day on January 6, 2021, despite a lack of any evidence of this. The subcommittee maintains that these alleged phone calls are entirely fictional and were only included in the DOD IG report to support the Army narrative of events, which underpins the report's conclusion that the DOD's response to January 6 was appropriate. 291. The DOD IG report claims that Secretary McCarthy called Major General Walker at 3:05 p.m. on January 6, 2021. Mr. McCarthy left Mr. Miller's office and called Major General Walker at approximately 3:05 p.m. This alleged instance of communication between the Secretary of the Army and the Commanding General of the DCNG is a critical detail, as both individuals are in the chain of command for approval of DCNG deployment. 293. The subcommittee has uncovered that at 3:05 p.m., Secretary McCarthy had not yet given approval to DCNG Major General Walker to deploy his forces to the U.S. Capitol. Instead, the DCNG remained at the Armory, less than 2 miles from the Capitol. Army leadership issued the go order to Major General Walker at 5:08 p.m. Secretary McCarthy did not confirm the claim in any transcribed interview that he called Major General Walker at approximately 3:05 p.m. in his interview with the DOD IG Secretary. 78. McCarthy could not recall whether he spoke to Major General Walker at that time, and instead asserts that it was one of my immediate staff. 290. Q. Sir, just to clarify, at 1,500 hours when it indicates that you directed Major General Walker to begin to prepare to move, was it you that were in contact with General Walker, or was it somebody from your office? A. I think it was one of my immediate staff because when I came out there was tremendous. I can't remember exactly if I talked to him about it or if it was my immediate staff. 296. Unfortunately, the DOD IG did not seek clarification from Secretary McCarthy or press him for specific details to determine whether this critical phone call took place, or who exactly on his staff may have talked to Major General Walker during the phone call. 297. The subcommittee formally submitted an inquiry to the DOD IG requesting an explanation and any evidence corroborating the alleged 3:05 p.m. call. 298. The subcommittee demanded the DOD IG explain how they could present this information in the report as fact, without Secretary McCarthy positively confirming that he spoke to Major General Walker. The DOD IG vehemently dismissed the subcommittee's concerns and provided a lengthy response to explain the statement made in the report regarding the 3:05 p.m. phone call. Much to the subcommittee's dismay, the DOD IG's response did not contain any additional evidence, such as phone records, previously concealed testimony, or video footage to substantiate their claims. According to Major General Walker's testimony, had he received this phone call, the DCNG would have been ready to deploy immediately. The DOD IG's reply acknowledged that Secretary McCarthy was uncertain if the phone call occurred. The response prefaced that the Secretary of the Army and his immediate staff were operating under a frenetic pace, and thus, as a result, we are not surprised by the Secretary's lack of certainty about whether he spoke with Major General Walker at 3:05 p.m. 301. The DoD IG substantiated the 3:05 p.m. call with statements from their interview with Brigadier General Christopher Laniv, who, at the time, served as the Director of Operations, Readiness, and Mobilization in the Department of the Army Headquarters. 302. In their official response to the subcommittee, the DoD IG writes, Brigadier General Laniv stated that he and Secretary McCarthy moved out of Secretary Miller's office to a smaller conference room in Secretary Miller's office suite, where Secretary McCarthy made some calls. 3 and 3. However, the DoD IG did not include the entire quote from Brigadier General Laniv's interview in their response. The entire exchange reveals that Brigadier General Laniv explicitly stated that he did not know who his boss, Secretary McCarthy, was speaking to on the phone. Hey, sir, at one point we moved out of the acting secretary's office. We went into a smaller conference room that it's almost opposite of the hall in his office space there. The secretary made some calls. At that time, I'm not sure exactly who he called at the time. 304. And I believe in one of those phone calls he did talk to General Walker. Again, I'm not on the phone and I was making the phone calls with him. But I was around that office space. 305. The subcommittee's analysis of this exchange indicates that the DoD IG does not possess any evidence to substantiate the claim that Secretary McCarthy called Major General Walker at 3:05 p.m. However, asserting, without evidence, that the phone call did take place, places the blame for the delayed deployment of the DCNG on Major General Walker, and absolves Secretary McCarthy and other Pentagon leadership. Another example of fabricated information in the DoD IG report is the claim that Secretary of the Army McCarthy called DCNG commanding General Walker at 5 p.m. on January 6, 2021, to communicate the deployment order for the National Guard to respond to us, Capitol. Mr. McCarthy called Major General Walker at approximately 4:35 p.m. and told him that Mr. Miller approved the RE mission request. Mr. McCarthy told Major General Walker to immediately move all available DCNG personnel from the Armory to Lot 16 at the corner of 1st Street and D Street and meet with the MPD Assistant Chief to perform perimeter and clearance operations. After Mr. McCarthy gave Major General Walker the deployment order, he handed the 80 telephone to Brigadier General Laniv, who told Major General Walker of the plan's details. In his interview with the DoD IG on March 18, 2021, Secretary McCarthy asserts that both he and Brigadier General Laniv spoke to Major General Walker. Q. And who was it that actually spoke to General Walker to give him the order to move? A. I remember being there with General Laniv. We talked briefly, and then he handled all the specifics. Q. When and how did General Walker get the direction to move from the Armory to the Capitol? A. At 16:35. Q. And who from? A. I'm trying to recall if I was with General Laniv, and we notified him then, and then General Laniv gave the specifics of the link-up point, first in D, the Assistant Chief Jeff Carroll and the specifics, and then it was at that 16:35. Secretary McCarthy changed his testimony about the alleged 4:35 p.m. communication with Major General Walker when interviewed by the Select Committee nearly 11 months later, on February 4th, 2022. In his altered testimony to the Select Committee, Secretary McCarthy denied speaking directly to General Walker and testified that it was Brigadier General Laniv who was the only participant on the alleged phone call. Due to the Secretary's preoccupation with preparing talking points for an upcoming press conference with Mayor Bowser. 308. We made the call at 4:30. I immediately turned, wrote the talking points down. Our operations director made the call. I was worried about my talking points. When pressed by the Select Committee as to whether he spoke directly to Major General Walker on the alleged 4:35 p.m. phone call, Secretary McCarthy confirms that he did not speak, and instead it was Brigadier General Laniv. Q. It sounds like you did not speak directly to General Walker. Is that fair? 1. A, he was the guy who was standing next to me. Because the moment we finished, they said, we've got to go now. And I had to put my thoughts together in like 2 or 3 minutes, my thoughts together. General Laniv has the authority to speak as the Secretary of the Army for deployment of capabilities worldwide, so that's not an unusual thing. In contrast to Secretary McCarthy's testimony, Brigadier General Laniv denied conveying the verbal authorization to deploy to the Capitol at 4:30 p.m. to Major General Walker. Brigadier General Laniv states to the DoD IG that it was Secretary McCarthy who passed on the approval to the DCNG. Q, can I jump back in real quick? This is an important point. So at 16:32, there's this verbal authorization. Was it you that passed it on to General Walker, or was it Secretary of the...
Yes, sir.
Q, Army that did that? A, sir, Secretary McCarthy, I believe, passed on that they had the approval. Brigadier General Laniv stated to the DoD-IG that Secretary McCarthy communicated approval to Major General Walker during the alleged 4:30 p.m. phone call. However, Secretary McCarthy testified to the Select Committee that our operations director made the call because Brigadier General Laniv has the authority to speak as the Secretary of the Army. Despite the Army inconsistent testimony, the DoD IG report has not corrected its false claim that the alleged 4:30 p.m. phone call occurred. Major General Walker has consistently denied that he received any communication from Secretary McCarthy or his staff at any point on January 6, 2021, as he was waiting for authorization to deploy his forces to the Capitol. Consistent with testimony from senior Army officials, Major General Walker did not receive approval to leave the D.C. Armory until 5:08 p.m. on January 6, 2021. 313. This is yet another example of the DoD IG including uncorroborated statements to deflect responsibility for the delayed deployment away from Pentagon officials. 82. Incomplete witness selection. The DoD IG interviewed 43 witnesses to construct report 2022-039. However, it failed to interview key personnel from the DCNG who were heavily involved in the events of January 6, 2021. The DCNG was pivotal in the DoD response on January 6, and the exclusion of these individuals omits a valuable and necessary perspective. Major General Walker's senior staff who were present with the general as the events unfolded at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, were not interviewed by the DoD IG. These include Adjutant General Brigadier General Aaron Dean, Staff Judge Advocate Colonel Earl Matthews, Major General Walker's aide de camp First Lieutenant Timothy Nick, Senior Enlisted Advisor Command Sergeant Major Michael Brooks. 314. The DoD IG refused to interview any of Major General Walker's senior staff to corroborate their timeline. The subcommittee raised concerns regarding the incomplete witness list with the DoD IG in an official inquiry. 315, the DoD IG claimed in their reply that Colonel Matthews told our investigators that he was not involved in January 6. However, the subcommittee interviewed Colonel Matthews under oath, and he denied this statement. 317, the DoD IG's decision to interview individuals with limited involvement and not interview the 4 senior officials with direct first-hand knowledge introduces more doubt into the objectivity of the DoD IG's report. Ex-Poor investigates standards, failure to conduct analysis, and selectively published information and report conclusions. The DoD IG report is listed as a review instead of investigation. As such, this report fails to make any significant attempt to investigate or provide analysis on the impact of DoD decisions or actions. The interviews conducted by the DoD IG focus on the development and confirmation of the official timeline published by the Army. 318, most interviews ended abruptly without any detailed questions about the what and why pertaining to the events of January 6, 2021. 319, 83. The DoD Instagram report concludes that the DoD's actions to respond to the USCP's RFA on January 6, 2021 were appropriate, supported by requirements consistent with the DoD's roles and responsibilities for DSCA, and compliant with laws, regulations, and other applicable guidance. 320, therefore, the scope of the IG's work merely reviewed whether DoD's actions were appropriate and compliant, and did not include any analysis or investigative rigor. In fact, during his interview with the DoD IG, Major General Walker raised concern over the DoD IG's scope of investigation. I thought you would ask more about the why. The why. Why did this happen? Q, for our review, and again, this is a review, we're looking at it from a standpoint of what did DoD do, and how does that conform to current policies, laws, regulations? That's what we're looking at. I think the why that you're getting at is, okay, why did this whole thing happen in the first place? No, that is going to be in someone else's lane. 321. The subcommittee has officially requested that the DoD IG publish a corrected report to eliminate all objective inaccuracies in order to preserve a factual historical record of the DoD's actions responding to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. 322. 5. Other issues with the DoD IG report. The DoD IG report does not include any of the following information. X. Secretary Miller and Secretary McCarthy's sworn statements indicating that they did not want to deploy the DCNG to the Capitol under any circumstances. 323. These statements were clearly outlined in their transcribed interviews. However, the DoD IG did not include them in its report. Pentagon leadership's communication severely limiting the response capability of the DCNG just days before January 6, 2021. These restrictions were unprecedented in their nature, however. The impact of these restrictions on DoD's response was not included or addressed in any way by the DoD IG. 4. Secretary McCarthy's statement that the development of a CONOP was an appropriate requirement at the height of the riot at the Capitol. Finding 5, DoD and DoD IG knowingly and inaccurately placed blame on D.C. National Guard leadership for the delayed DoD response. In June 2020, the DoD published an article highlighting the importance of National Guard troops in responding to civil unrest. The DoD labels the National Guard as its first choice for such missions. 324, in particular, within Washington, D.C., the DCNG are the DoD's designated organization to ensure peace, order, and safety for federal installations and monuments. 325. The DoD IG report makes alarming accusations regarding the blame for the DCNG delay in responding to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. The DoD IG uses partial testimony and fails to analyze critical witness statements to construe a narrative that Major General Walker lied to Congress during a March 2021 Senate hearing, and further suggests that the DCNG is responsible for the timing of the DoD response to the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The DoD IG report accuses the 2-star general and commander of the D.C. National Guard, William Walker, of perjury. On March 3, 2021, Major General Walker testified to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and Senate Rules and Administration Committees. Major General Walker's testimony revealed information that is not favorable to Army staff and senior Pentagon officials, and thus DoD IG constructed their report to deliberately undermine the DCNG commander's sworn testimony. During the hearing, Major General Walker testified that, if given approval, he could have had 150 guardsmen to the Capitol within 20 minutes. 328, however, the DoD IG report dismissed this claim with testimony from an unnamed witness, thereby casting doubt that the DCNG could have responded in a timely fashion on January 6th. According to a witness, Mr. McCarthy had to reissue the deployment order to Major General Walker 30 minutes after he originally conveyed it to Major General Walker, which the witness believed contradicts Major General Walker's March 3, 2021 testimony to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental. 85. Affairs and Senate Rules and Administration Committees. The witness told us that Major General Walker's assertion to those committees that the DCNG could have responded to the Capitol in 20 minutes was not true. The witness said, "It took 27 minutes for to get the order from around to actually get his wheels moving on the bus." In addition, the witness said mischaracterization was the word the witness would use to describe Major General Walker's response to questions from congressional committees. 329. The DoD IG shares that the witness said mischaracterization was the word the witness would use to describe Major General Walker's response to questions from congressional committees. However, the DoD IG failed to corroborate this witness's claim, suggesting that the two-star general was not truthful or in any way mischaracterized his testimony to Congress. One other witness provided similar testimony to the DoD IG. The subcommittee investigated these witnesses and discovered that these accusations came from two of Secretary McCarthy's junior Army staff members. The Army officers unsurprisingly attached any suggestion of delay to Major General Walker as opposed to their boss, Secretary McCarthy. The Instagram failed to push back on these claims or conduct any meaningful analysis. Instead, the DoD IG included these allegations as fact in their final report. However, one of the aforementioned witnesses, Secretary McCarthy's junior officer, confirmed to the DoD IG that no call was placed to Major General Walker, confirming Major General Walker and his staff's consistent testimony that no call to deploy the DCNG to the Capitol was ever received prior to 5:08 p.m. The DoD IG declined to include this information in its final report. Secretary McCarthy's principal spokesperson and communications officer, who was present with Secretary McCarthy throughout the day on January 6, provided conflicting testimony to the DoD IG. 330. The officer's testimony initially confirmed Major General Walker's position that no call was received prior to 5:08 p.m. However, the DoD IG investigator provided the officer with an exhibit of the DoD's official timeline for January 6. The officer's testimony, initially consistent with Major General Walker, only shifts when she references the DoD's timeline. We're aware that General Walker testified to Joint Senate committees that he didn't get word that he was approved to move from the Armory to the Capitol until a few minutes after 17. What is your comment about that? 6. I believe that he did get approval to the action. It's just that he didn't get the approval to do the specific actions until after 17, once they were clear on what they were actually doing. The officer's first statement appears to confirm that DCNG Major General Walker did not get approval until 5 p.m., only once it was clear what they were doing, likely referring to the CONOP requirement. The DoD IG followed up quickly during the interview, as this statement from this officer did not fit the timeline suggested by other witnesses. Are you saying that you believe that no one conveyed that level of specificity to General Walker until after 17? That's correct. And how do you know that? Oh, 17. It was after 16. Hold on one second. It was close to 17. Yes. So what? Do not know the exact time frame, but I just know that it was close. So once a plan was developed, once everyone spoke to Acting Secretary of Defense and the chairman, that information was communicated to General Walker, but I just don't know when. On the timeline that I have, it says 1625. This exchange with the DoD IG investigator and officer demonstrates how quickly the officer changes their confirmation of when Major General Walker received notification to deploy. To the Capitol, when pressed by the interviewer, this officer merely confirms whatever timeline has been officially published. On the timeline that I have, it says 1625. The DoD IG does not follow up to firmly grasp or ascertain what the witness wanted to convey when revealing that Major General Walker didn't get the approval to do the specific actions until after 17. This officer declared that Major General Walker manipulated the truth in his testimony to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committees in March of 2021. Some of the things that Major General Walker said in his testimony, they were embellished, and while some of it was truthful, he wasn't telling the whole truth, so he manipulated the truth. One of the things he said was that the National Guard had all of their equipment in their trucks, in their vehicles. That's not an accurate statement. They had equipment, but they only had their flak vests and helmets. They didn't have riot gear. However, testimony from key DCNG personnel provided evidence to refute this claim. Lieutenant Colonel Craig Hunter, who was commander of Task Force Guardian, oversaw all 340 soldiers and airmen on January 6, testifies that the DCNG did in fact have riot gear in their possession. But on the 6th, we had time that morning to put of the gear into every individual vehicle. So every vehicle had helmets, shin guards, protective shields, vests, everything in the vehicle. So in the case of the soldiers and airmen out there, something happened, they needed protection, they didn't have to fall back to a different point. It was right there in their vehicles if they needed. 334. DoD IG did not attempt to resolve this contradictory testimony based on the various witness statements. While the actions and judgment of some DoD members on January 6 was disappointing, it was worsened by manipulation of the DoD IG report to cover up the actions of senior DoD staff. The report blamed the very soldiers who were standing by, ready to come to the aid of those under attack at the Capitol. The following represents areas of concern for inaccurately blaming the DC National Guard for the events of January 6. 1. Blaming the DCNG for the delay. This is alarming, knowing that the DCNG were ready to deploy by 3 p.m. and were intentionally held back by the Pentagon. The subcommittee has established that the leaders in the Pentagon failed to call Major General Walker. 2. Blaming the DCNG for not being prepared for this mission, with full knowledge that countering civil disturbance is a core mission area, and that Secretary McCarthy personally witnessed rehearsals demonstrating this capability. 3. Blaming the DCNG commander for misrepresenting his congressional testimony based on comments from junior officers. DoD IG then failed to interview any of Major General Walker's staff who were with him all day on January 6, 2021. 4. Negatively impacting the careers of several National Guard officers and enlisted guardsmen, while Pentagon general officers, whose judgment should be questioned, received promotions in both rank and command. Fortunately, several DCNG members were willing to come forward as whistleblowers to assist in ensuring the truth comes forth. X. Subcommittee Whistleblower Hearing. April 17, 2024. Subcommittee hearing, 3 years later, DC National Guard. Whistleblowers speak out on January 6th delay. On April 17, 2024, the subcommittee held a hearing with 4 whistleblowers who were members of the D.C. National Guard and who were heavily involved in this military unit's actions on January 6, 2021. 335. The subcommittee was approached by approximately 20 whistleblowers, but in the interest of clarity, the subcommittee selected the following 4 individuals to serve as witnesses during a subcommittee hearing. 1. Brigadier General Aaron Dean, D.C. National Guard Adjutant General, as the adjutant. General, Brigadier General Dean is the second in command at the D.C. National Guard under Major General Walker. Given the seriousness of the riots on January 6, Brigadier General Dean was involved in all significant discussions within the D.C. National Guard. He was collocated with, or in constant communication with, Major General Walker all day on January 6, 2021. 2. Colonel Earl Matthews, D.C. National Guard Staff Judge Advocate. Given the seriousness of the riots on January 6, Colonel Matthews was involved in all senior-level DCNG discussions and decisions on that day. 3. Captain Timothy Nick, aide-de-camp to Major General William Walker, as the aide to Major General Walker. Captain Nick's responsibilities included being with the commander and documenting all critical events that happened on this hectic day. 4. Command Sergeant Major Michael Brooks, Command Sergeant Major and Senior, enlisted advisor. While there are many officers in the chain of command, no senior leader has a significant discussion or makes an impactful decision without the involvement and concurrence of their senior enlisted advisor. Command Sergeant Major Brooks is responsible for the more than 2,000 enlisted personnel that make up the D.C. National Guard. LDS Walter Pyatt, Director of Army Staff. Christopher Miller, Acting Secretary of Defense. Ryan McCarthy, Secretary of the Army. Mo William Walker, Commanding General, D.C. National Guard. Colonel Earl Matthews, Com. Michael Brooks, Judge Advocate, U.S. Army Senior Enlisted Officer. 91. General Charles Flynn, Deputy Chief of Staff for Army Operations, Plans, and Training. So Aaron Dean, Adjutant General CPT Timothy Nick aide-de-camp to. Many current and former members of the DCNG approached the subcommittee with concerns about the DoD IG report. The subcommittee conducted transcribed interviews and selected these 4 DCNG personnel who were closest to the operations, decision-making, and communications of the DCNG on January 6, 2021. All 4 whistleblowers who appeared as witnesses at the April 17, 2024 subcommittee hearing reported directly to the commanding general of the DCNG, William Walker, on January 6, 2021. All 4 whistleblowers testified under oath that claims made in the DoD IG report are wholly inaccurate, specifically regarding alleged phone calls between Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy and Major General William Walker at 3:05 p.m. and 4:35 p.m. on January 6, 2021. 337. All 4 whistleblowers maintained consistent accounts of the events on January 6, 2021, the D.C. National Guard were not given approval to deploy to the U.S. Capitol by the Pentagon chain of command until after 5 p.m. on January 6, 2021. 338, not a single D.C. National Guardsman who testified to the subcommittee on April 17, 2024, was interviewed by the DoD IG to construct the DoD IG report. 339. On March 6, 2024, Colonel Matthews participated in a bipartisan transcribed interview with the subcommittee. 340, Colonel Matthews testified about the condition of the soldiers at the D.C. Armory as they waited several hours for the deployment order from the Pentagon to respond to the violence at the U.S. Capitol. And we have people at the D.C. Armory who are able to help, and they're not moving. And they're not allowed to move. They're not allowed to go down there. 341. On March 14, 2024, Command Sergeant Major Brooks participated in a transcribed interview with the subcommittee. 342, Command Sergeant Major Brooks shared candid details regarding the DCNG delay on January 6. 92, like literally sitting on a bus just waiting to drive to the Capitol and do the best they could to support the Capitol Police. 343. On March 26, 2024, Brigadier General Aaron Dean participated in a transcribed interview with the subcommittee. Brigadier General Dean confirmed that the DCNG did not receive any orders to deploy to the Capitol until after 5 p.m. on January 6, 2021. There were no phone calls made. There was no one telling anybody to move toward the Capitol prior to 5 o'clock. Brigadier General Aaron Dean also detailed the concern about optics from senior Army staff at the Pentagon in his interview with the subcommittee. There was a bunch of conversation within that initial call, and then General Pyatt was the one that said, "I am concerned about optics of guardsmen being at the Capitol." And I thought to myself, okay, I'm not sure why we're concerned about optics when it comes to, saving lives and preventing loss of property, but okay. 346. On April 9th, 2024, Captain Timothy Nick participated in a transcribed interview with the subcommittee. Major General Walker's aide-de-camp testified that DCNG were struggling to receive any orders whatsoever from Pentagon leadership. I can't speak to what the Pentagon was doing. I don't know why it took almost 3 hours to make a decision, whether it was a crisis of leadership at the time or decision paralysis at the Pentagon from key senior leaders. It was definitely delayed. And some of the things that the general staff were asking for, in my eyes, were not relevant for the situation. Concept of operations. It seemed like they wanted a PowerPoint presentation with symbols and signs of where we're going. Under the circumstances, that's not feasible. 348, the sworn testimony from the interviews and the subsequent subcommittee hearing on April 17, 2024, from these 4 District of Columbia National Guardsmen, contradicts evidence and claims suggested by the conclusions in the November 2021 DoD IG report. The subcommittee does not have a vested interest in supporting either the claims or narratives of the whistleblowers against the DoD IG report. As an oversight entity, the subcommittee is simply highlighting the lack of independent and rigorous analysis by the DoD IG in their failure to interview the DC. 93 National Guard witnesses who have maintained a different account of DoD events on January 6, 2021. Finding 6, DoD IG was not responsive to the subcommittee's requests, and at times obstructed the subcommittee's work. The subcommittee has detected an inappropriately close relationship between the DoD Inspector General and DoD, which compromises the Inspector General's ability to conduct objective oversight. It is the subcommittee's assessment of the DoD IG's investigation of the events on January 6, 2021, that the DoD IG is inappropriately deferential to the DoD. As such, the DoD IG may be incapable of providing an unbiased, independent review of DoD actions. The following points outline the interactions of the subcommittee and DoD IG that illustrate this finding. Additionally, our interactions with the governing body overseeing the DoD IG, the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, further raise concerns about the ability for IGs to remain unbiased from the agencies and departments tasked with overseeing. Subcommittee interactions with the Department of Defense Inspector General. On February 29, 2024, Chairman Lodermilk submitted a letter to DoD Inspector General Robert Storch requesting an unredacted version of Report Number DODIG 2022-39, as well as witness transcripts used to construct the report. 349. In conducting its oversight responsibilities, the subcommittee requested these materials to examine the evidence used to support the DoD IG report's conclusion. Chairman Lodermilk explicitly asks DoD Inspector General Storch, as part of my investigation into the security failures that occurred on January 6, 2021, it is crucial for the subcommittee to review records and materials your office holds regarding that day. Nearly 5 weeks later, on April 2, 2024, the DoD IG replied, stating that it could not support Chairman Lodermilk's request for an unredacted version of Report Number DODIG 2022-39, as well as witness interview transcripts. Inspector General Storch failed to provide the materials requested by Chairman Lodermilk on February 29, 2024. According to the DoD IG, the information which the subcommittee requested was inappropriate and could not be released outside the executive branch, under direction of the Department of the Army and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This information, determined by the Army and FBI to be controlled unclassified information that could not be released outside the executive branch, is not within my office's authority to release. 351. In their April 2, 2024 response, the DoD IG denied the subcommittee's request for an unredacted version of Report 2022-39 and witness transcripts. Inspector General Storch asserted that the requested information contains information not within unilateral authority of the DoD IG to release. 352. After months of bureaucratic stonewalling and continued negotiations, on June 13, 2024, the DoD IG agreed for the subcommittee to conduct an in-camera review of minimally redacted witness transcripts used to construct the DoD IG report and a minimally redacted version of the DoD IG report. Strangely, Office of the Secretary of Defense personnel were copied on email chains between the subcommittee and DoD IG, and interfered with subcommittee's ability to work in good faith with the DoD IG. The subcommittee participated in the in-camera review of DoD IG documents at the Pentagon on June 20 and 21, 2024. However, days before the in-camera review, the Office of the Secretary of Defense restricted the subcommittee personnel who could attend the review and denied access to the Pentagon for certain subcommittee part-time staff. Unfortunately, the subcommittee's in-camera visit to the Pentagon confirmed suspicions that the DoD IG failed to conduct a thorough investigation. The Inspector General staff present at the in-camera could not answer basic questions pertaining to witness statements and transcribed interviews and had to contact investigators for clarification. Furthermore, the Instagram withheld a certain witness interview transcript, which only became apparent when subcommittee staff noticed that the first copy of the transcript concluded with the DoD IG suggesting they would conduct another interview in the future. It became clear to Chairman Lodermilk that the good faith negotiation that led to an in-camera review was not sufficient for the subcommittee to effectively perform its oversight duties pertaining to the safety of the U.S. Capitol. 353. Following further negotiations on July 2, 2024, the DoD Office of General Counsel, coordinating with the DoD IG, agreed to provide the subcommittee with lightly redacted versions of witness transcripts by July 14, 2024. 354. The DoD IG failed to meet the July 14, 2024 deadline and explained that the delay was due to interagency equities, which to this day the subcommittee does not understand. Finally, on August 21, 2024, all 43 DoD IG witness transcripts were given to the subcommittee. On September 5, 2024, the subcommittee released all previously concealed for years by the DoD witness interviews transcripts to the public. The witness testimonies in these now publicly released interviews contain evidence for 2 new revelations. Senior Pentagon officials dismissed President Trump's directives to ensure safety for the demonstrations on January 6, 2021, and intentionally delayed deployment of the D.C. National Guard due to concerns over optics. It is extremely concerning and inappropriate for the exact entity which the Inspector General is tasked with overseeing obstructs or influences the investigative process and communications. The DoD IG is supposed to be an impartial and independent watchdog. However, it is clear to the subcommittee that the Office of the Secretary of Defense, based on our interactions throughout the in-camera review process, is intimately involved in the operations of the DoD IG. The subcommittee's suspicions of a flawed DoD IG report were confirmed due to the DoD's lack of transparency with the subcommittee's investigation, contrived bureaucratic obstacles, and the DoD initially concealing information requested by appropriate congressional oversight authority. It appears that DoD 2022-39's primary purpose was to construct a narrative suited to the DoD's interests, a story that portrayed DoD in a favorable light and ensured that no DoD personnel, particularly high-ranking officials, broke the law. This is not the purpose of any Inspector General. The subcommittee recommends that a review is conducted to see if this behavior is unique to this report or, as we suspect, that this incestuous behavior is common among the DoD IG office. Subcommittee interactions with the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. On July 23, 2024, the chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, Honorable Mark Greenblatt, testified before the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Subcommittee on Government Operations and the Federal Workforce. At this hearing, Subcommittee Chairman Lodermilk waved on to ask the SIGI chairman whether factually inaccurate reports, such as DoD IG 2022-39, can be amended or revised. Indeed, Mr. Greenblatt asserted that this is possible. Therefore, the subcommittee submitted the following questions for the record to SIGI. Does SIGI provide guidance for IGs on how to retract or revise reports that are found to contain errors? If so, please provide that guidance. If not, please explain why. Report, you stated, I've seen that happen in the past, sir, and we try to get it right, get the right answer, and if we get it wrong, I think it would be wholly appropriate to take down whatever is wrong and replace it with something that is factually accurate. What steps do we, as an oversight subcommittee, take to begin the process of correcting the errors in DoD IG report number DoD 2022-39? In this case, are corrections made to the existing report, an addendum to the existing report, or is a new report produced? What is SIGI's role in the evaluation of whether an IG report that contains errors must be corrected? In addition, the subcommittee is working to achieve greater clarity as to why review was selected as the method selected to consider the DoD's roles, responsibilities, and actions on January 6th. According to the DoD IG website, the various components of the organization can include audits, investigations, and evaluations, 356. However, a review was pursued by the DoD IG. Specifically, the scope of investigation is detailed on the first page of DoD IG 2022-39. We evaluated whether the DoD's actions were appropriate and supported by requirements. We also examined whether the DoD complied with applicable laws, regulations, and other guidance in its response to requests for assistance. As is elucidated by the piecemeal logic and inconsistent testimony to construct the narrative in the report, the document fails to analyze or question the actions and decisions of senior DoD officials. In other words, the DoD IG conducted a storytelling operation without questioning whether each witness's story led to a successful outcome regarding DoD's reaction to the events of the Capitol on January 6th. To that end, the subcommittee included the following in question for the record to SIGI. ODODIG 2022 could have been executed as an evaluation, administrative, investigation, or an audit, according to the organization guidance on the DoD IG website. However, it was selected to be conducted as a review. Please explain the difference between a review from other types of report.
Does SIGI have any insight as to why DoD IG selected a review for this?
Investigation? ODODIG 2022-39 attempted to identify the DoD's actions on January 6, however, failed to conduct any analysis to the impact of these actions to the DoD's response to the events on January 6. Is a review prohibited from conducting analysis on crucial actions that DoD chose to pursue? Does SIGI believe that DoDIG -2022-0039 should have been a review, or would an administrative investigation have been a better option for this case? Prior to the July 2024 hearing with Chairman Greenblatt, the subcommittee had reached out to SIGI over concerns with the DoD IG report. Unfortunately, SIGI did not respond to the subcommittee's query and instead directly forwarded our questions to the DoD IG. As of the date of publication, the subcommittee has yet to receive any responses from SIGI. Therefore, the subcommittee lacks confidence in SIGI's ability to successfully play its role as the oversight entity for Inspectors General. Finally, the subcommittee must note that our relationship with DoD IG and SIGI is only representative of a singular query with these organizations and thus may not represent systemic issues. The subcommittee is only concerned with a singular flawed report and has only discovered this troubling lack of oversight and professionalism from both the DoD IG and SIGI throughout our investigation. The subcommittee acknowledges that a singular sample size is not sufficient to conclude that our concerns are present throughout the entirety of both organizations. Nonetheless, our finding that the DoD IG and DoD have collaborated to impede the subcommittee's investigation, and furthermore that the Inspectors General watchdog is not holding the DoD IG accountable, remains troubling in our estimation. Inspectors General. Due to the broad response and reaction to January 6, 2021 from across the federal government, many agency watchdogs opened independent investigations into their respective agency or department's role in planning for and responding to January 6. These independent watchdogs, also known as Inspectors General, were statutorily created to report directly to Congress about the activities and practices of the agency they are assigned. 357 IGs are also tasked with detecting and preventing waste, fraud, and abuse throughout the government. The subcommittee relied heavily on IGS for their independent, fact-based analysis of the actions of their individual department or agency. However, there has been a concerning trend among IGs where their independence to conduct their work is strained by the agency they are tasked to oversee. For example, In the subcommittee's work with the Department of Homeland Security Instagram, we uncovered that DHS threatened to withhold access to the IG if they published a report that was not cleared by DHS. After DHS accepted our request for an in-camera review of its unredacted Instagram report, it is the subcommittee's opinion that significant redactions DHS imposed served only to obscure culpability or failures. The subcommittee maintains that IGs are independent entities, and it is not acceptable for an agency to threaten to withhold access to an Instagram. On July 23, 2024, Chairman Lodermilk waved on to a Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Subcommittee on Government Operations and the Federal Workforce hearing with the Chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, Mark Greenblatt. Since Instagram is tasked with overseeing IGs and setting standards for IG audits, inspections, evaluations, and investigations. 359 during this hearing, Chair Greenblatt indicated that it would never be acceptable for an agency to condition access based on the favorability of reports. 360. After this hearing, Chairman Lodermilk submitted over 50 questions for the record to Chair Greenblatt, seeking answers about Instagram operations, independence issues, and process issues at SIGI. To date, the subcommittee, nor the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, have received answers to these QFRs. In response to these developments, Chairman Lodermilk sent a letter to DHS Secretary Mayorkas on July 24, 2024, expressing concern that 2 of the 3 reports about DHS's actions on January 6 had not yet been released. 361, Chairman Lodermilk indicated in this letter that the subcommittee was aware that 357 Congressional Research Service, CRS Report R45450, Statutory Inspectors General in the Federal Government, a primer. 358 ID, Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency Mission. 360 Committee on House Administration, Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Lodermilk questions SIGI Chairman Greenblatt, YouTube. 361 letter from Barry Lodermilk, Chairman, Com. On H. Admin, Oversight Subcom, to Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary, Deputy of Homeland Security, 100%. One of these reports was finalized and had been waiting for DHS approval since April 2024, well past the standard 30 days given to departments to review Instagram reports. DHS responded on August 1, 2024, stating that the subcommittee's concerns were invalid because the report was released that day. 363, without Chairman Lodermilk's persistent inquiries, DHS would have likely delayed the release of this report indefinitely. Additionally, Chairman Lodermilk and Senator Chuck Grassley sent a letter to DHS Secretary Mayorkas on August 20th, 2024, outlining their concerns of access issues for the DHS IG, citing the semi-annual reports spanning back to September 2021. 364. The subcommittee did not receive a response from DHS and was told by the department that while these allegations have previously been addressed in their entirety by DHS, the timeline envisioned in the letter was not feasible. DHS was asked to respond by August 27, 2024. 365. On August 20th, 2024, Chairman Lodermilk and Senator Grassley also sent a letter to the DHS IG requesting certain documents that the subcommittee had already seen but were not turned over by the DHS IG to back up the IG's continued claims of access issues and tampering by DHS. 366. The DHS IG is refusing to cooperate further with the subcommittee on this issue. The subcommittee is committed to working with the committees of jurisdiction to provide meaningful reforms that protect the integrity and independence of IGS and allow these crucial watchdogs to operate independently of their department or agency without fear of retribution, hindering future investigations. The group continues south on 1st Street and Louisiana Avenue. 370. They then cross Constitution Avenue and enter Capitol property at Union Square at 6:31 a.m. 371. For the next 55 minutes, the group assembled the structure. Through a review of images and artifacts collected by the National Museum of American, obtained by the subcommittee, it is clear that the group had planned to build this particular construction in advance. 372. The lumber used in the construction had corresponding numbers written on them in black marker that facilitated a rapid construction of the gallows base. The group did not attach the crossbar at the top of the gallows at this time. The footage shows an apparent group leader, identifiable by a long trench coat, white scarf, fedora-style hat, and carrying a cane. During the 55-minute construction, the apparent leader and one other individual temporarily depart the site of the gallows. 373. They were seen walking north on 3rd Street NW before disappearing from view behind the United States Department of Labor's building on the corner of 3rd Street NW and Constitution Avenue NW. 374. 105. The two men emerge at the intersection of 3rd Street NW and Constitution Avenue NW 20. Minutes later with coffee, they proceed to rejoin the group and help finish assembling the gallows. At 7:18 a.m., the entire group departs Union Square, again crossing the same intersection heading north, and disappear from view behind the DOL building. 106. The group then returned to the site of the partial gallows at approximately 1 p.m., at which point they attached the structure's crossbeam in a noose made of bright orange rope. 378. The subcommittee's review of USCP CCTV footage was useful to identify the timing and route taken by the group, but not sufficient to identify the individuals involved in the gallows. Unfortunately, the USCP CCTV cameras that captured the group were too distant to allow for effective facial identification. The subcommittee identified at least 4 buildings located along the group's route that would have likely recorded footage with greater image fidelity. These include the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the U.S. Department of Labor's Francis Perkins Building, the U.S. District Court Building for the District of Columbia, and a prominent law firm. The following map illustrates the path taken by the group to the gallows construction site and the locations of the buildings that likely recorded their activity. D. 379. The subcommittee's review of commercially available street view photographs taken in the months prior to January 6, 2021, revealed that each of the buildings had external cameras that would have likely captured the group of gallows constructors with much more clarity than that available from USCP CCTV. The following map shows that in the case of the DOL and DC District Court buildings, the cameras would have likely captured 2 of the constructors at least 3 times on January 6. 399 Google LLC, Google Maps, 108, 380. The subcommittee contacted the DOL 381 DC District Court US, Tax Court 383 Federal Bureau of Prisons 384, and the law firm's building manager 385 to ask if they were ever contacted by any federal agency or congressional committee to provide video footage for January 6, 2021. Shockingly, each entity confirmed that they were never contacted for this footage by any government entity, including the FBI and the Select Committee. Both the Select Committee and the FBI had access to the same USCP CCTV footage available to the subcommittee, yet neither entity made any effort to obtain additional, clear video that could have led to the identification of the individuals in question. It is unclear what the Select Committee or FBI did to investigate the gallows, if anything, but the subcommittee was able to identify previously unreleased information, including the route taken by the gallows constructors on January 6, 2021. 9. United States Capitol Police guidelines prohibit the construction of temporary structures on Capitol grounds. Despite this, USCP made no effort to prevent the construction of the gallows, and the USCP CCTV footage confirms that the gallows remained on Capitol grounds for a full 26 hours with no effort to have them removed. 387 multiple USCP cameras faced the location of the gallows on the west side of the Capitol, and several USCP officers were within the vicinity of the gallows. Yet no officers ever approached the constructors during the 55 minutes spent building the gallows on Capitol property. No radio calls or notifications were distributed to officers about the presence of an illegal structure on Capitol grounds, and no officers responded to the structure at any time. 388. The gallows were finally removed at roughly 9:06 a.m. on January 7, 2021, 389, after USCP ignored the structure overnight. USCP radio transmissions appear to indicate that there was no order or request to investigate the gallows, and USCP video footage reveals that no law enforcement entity investigated the structure before it was removed and destroyed. Instead, USCP video footage shows architect of the Capitol employees loading the structure into the back of a dump truck and crushing it using a forklift. The AOC then discarded the now broken lumber alongside the other refuse left on Capitol grounds from January 6. See a more detailed analysis in Appendix 2. Internal emails among USCP leadership indicate a lack of knowledge as to the location of the gallows remnants. 390. These emails confirm the subcommittee's findings. When questioned by the subcommittee, AOC responded that they had no conversations with the FBI, USCP, or any other entity about the gallows on or after January 6, and that the remnants of the gallows were transported to a waste management facility for disposal, alongside other trash and debris. 391. In fact, the only known surviving portion of the gallows structure is the noose, which was recovered by a Dutch journalist and given to the FBI. The subcommittee identified shocking failures by the FBI, USCP, AOC, the Select Committee, and other federal agencies. These include 110. 1. The failure to discover or prevent the construction of gallows on United States Capitol property. 2. The failure to respond to the presence of gallows on Capitol property for approximately 26 hours, including nearly 5 hours before crowds began to arrive at the Capitol from the ellipse, and the roughly 15 hours between the removal of protesters from Capitol property and the dismantling of the gallows. 3. The failure to preserve or retain the gallows, a key component of the events and imagery of January 6, and instead destroying and disposing of the structure. And 4. The failure to investigate the creation of the gallows, make any effort to track the root of its constructors, or determine their identity by reviewing critical footage available from partner federal agencies. Through these failures, vital physical and visual evidence has been destroyed or deleted that would have greatly benefited the government's attempts to apprehend the constructors of the gallows, who clearly had premeditated motives for that day, and who could have provided insightful testimony into the events of January 6. Law enforcement response to January 6. United States Secret Service. After the July 2024 assassination attempt on President Trump, the subcommittee learned that the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General had 2 outstanding reports concerning the Department of Homeland Security's response on January 6. One of these outstanding reports was about the Secret Service's preparedness and response concerning President Trump, Vice President Pence, and Vice President-elect Harris. In each of these situations, the Secret Service failed to effectively ensure the safety of their protectees. The failures of the Secret Service on January 6 are directly related to the failures of the Secret Service on July 13, 2024, when President Trump was nearly assassinated in Butler, Pennsylvania. The subcommittee worked with the DHS OIG after we became aware that Secretary Mayorkas was delaying the release of the report, United States Secret Service preparation for and response to the events of January 6, 2021, which was released to Congress on August 1, 2024, and to the American public on August 2, 2024. The subcommittee has seen evidence from the DHS OIG that this report was given to DHS for technical correction and managerial comment on April 30, 2024. However, DHS claimed in an August 1, 2024 letter that they completed a final multi-layered, multi-stakeholder review of the entire report in 6 business days. 393. The subcommittee viewed OIG 24-42 in camera. The subcommittee believes there are acceptable redactions in this report, but has serious concerns with other redactions that appear to disguise DHS culpability in the intelligence. Failures leading up to January 6, failures of the Secret Service to adequately plan for Vice President Pence's evacuation, and failure to adequately sweep the DNC before the arrival of Vice President-elect Harris. The subcommittee believes that there are parallels between the failures of the Secret Service on January 6 and the failures resulting in the attempted assassination of President Trump on July 13, 2024. Conclusions based on the OIG-2442 report. 1. USCP limited the number of Secret Service agents able to be inside the Capitol with Vice President Pence on January 6. The counter-assault team was outside the building and did not enter when it was breached because they did not know the layout of the Capitol. 112. 2. The Secret Service either did not receive or did not heed any intelligence products about the threats to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, including the FBI Norfolk report and the Postal Inspection Service report. 3. Secret Service Protective Intelligence Division personnel's March for Trump brief did not include any indications of civil disobedience because posters must explicitly state how they will break laws to be noted in the brief. 4. Secret Service guidance did not include instruction on what exterior areas should be swept by a canine for buildings like the DNC. There are varying accounts of whether the bushes should have been swept or not based on guidance given in manuals and by supervisors. 5. The two technologies rule states that some combination of canine, X-ray, and explosive ordnance detection should be utilized during any explosive sweep. Only canines were used to sweep the DNC because there were issues requesting and obtaining EOD support. On July 24, 2024, Chairman Lodermilk sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas demanding he immediately review and clear OIG 24-42 and express that it is unacceptable for DHS to delay or deny the DHS-OIG access to conduct investigations and publish their findings to both Congress and the American people. 399 on August 1, 2024, DHS-OIG was finally given permission to release OIG 24-42. The DHS-OIG has been reporting access issues for years, beginning with their semi-annual report to Congress in September 2021. These access issues include not providing read-only access to databases, claiming that the Privacy Act and the Presidential Records Act prohibited the disclosure of records, and stating that some records needed to be cleared by counsel before being turned over to DHS-OIG. DHS-OIG further reported that the Secret Service significantly delayed its access to information, impeding the progress of their review for OIG 24-42. For example, the Secret Service delayed DHS-OIG's access to internal emails for 7 months. When the Secret Service finally responded, it asked DHS-OIG to reduce the scope of its request. The reduced scope is concerning given that several congressional committees sought all electronic records from the Secret Service, and the Secret Service appeared unwilling to comply with its own watchdog's request. Chairman Lodermilk and Senator Chuck Grassley sent multiple letters to Secretary Mayorkas and DHS Inspector General Joseph Kafari, expressing concern at these continued access issues and requests for documents pertaining to these delays. To date, the subcommittee has not received meaningful responses from either department. The DHS-OIG, who has repeatedly claimed these access issues are pervasive and significantly hinder the ability of the OIG to conduct audits, inspections, and evaluations, is no longer cooperating with the subcommittee's requests for information. Secretary Mayorkas has refused to engage with the DHS-OIG or congressional committees on this issue, claiming that DHS has addressed these allegations, but refuses to provide such responses by DHS to the subcommittee. Without full cooperation from the executive branch, the subcommittee is significantly hindered in conducting oversight of the response to January 6 to ensure such failures and oversights never happen again. March. Conclusion. The events of January 6, 2021 were preventable. For nearly 4 years, Democrats pushed the narrative that President Trump was solely responsible for the riot at the Capitol, spending millions of taxpayer dollars on a politically motivated witch hunt while failing to legitimately examine how United States Capitol leadership was unable to ensure adequate protection for members of Congress and thousands of congressional staff. Incredibly, it would take nearly 4 years for video footage to emerge of Speaker Pelosi in a rare moment of true leadership, admitting that she was fully responsible for the security failures that day. While Democrats politicized Capitol security and prioritized personal political futures, the subcommittee's unbiased approach to our investigation produced previously undisclosed evidence that undermines the Select Committee's narrative. Based on the evidence obtained by this subcommittee, numerous federal laws were likely broken by Liz Cheney, the former vice chair of the January 6 Select Committee, and these violations should be investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Evidence uncovered by the subcommittee revealed that former Congresswoman Liz Cheney tampered with at least one witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, by secretly communicating with Hutchinson without Hutchinson's attorney's knowledge. This secret communication with a witness is improper and likely violates 18 U.S.C. 1512. Such action is outside the due functioning of the legislative process and therefore not protected by the Speech and Debate Clause. The Federal Bureau of Investigation must also investigate Representative Cheney for violating 18 U.S.C. 1622, which prohibits any person from procuring another person to commit perjury. Based on the evidence obtained by the subcommittee, Hutchinson committed perjury when she lied under oath to the Select Committee. Additionally, Hutchinson was interviewed by the FBI as part of its investigation into President Trump. This subcommittee sought a copy of the FBI Report 302 documenting this interview and Hutchinson's statements, but the FBI has refused to produce this vital document. The FBI must immediately review the testimony given by Hutchinson in this interview to determine if she also lied in her FBI interview, and, if so, the role former Representative Cheney played in instigating Hutchinson to radically change her testimony. The FBI still has not admitted what records it received from the Select Committee. Some statements made by Special Counsel Jack Smith's team revealed that the special prosecutor received witness transcripts that were not released publicly by the Select Committee. However, the special counsel has never acknowledged how many transcripts he received, or whether he also received the video recordings of these transcribed interviews that the Select Committee failed to archive. It is clear from Congressman Thompson's admission that he violated House rules by deleting the Select Committee's recordings of transcribed interviews. The Select Committee recorded hundreds of transcribed interviews, but Representative Thompson chose to delete these 117 recordings instead of archiving them as required by House rules. As chair of the Select Committee, Representative Thompson was solely responsible for complying with House rules related to the archiving of committee records such as these recordings. By deleting these recordings, Representative Thompson prevented House Republicans from reviewing these videos, which could have contained important information, specifically with respect to the interviews of Cassidy Hutchinson. These crimes must be fully investigated, and individuals held responsible to maintain the trust of the American people in their government.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Stay where you are. This is a big damn show. It really is. We have Congressman Barry Lodermilk, who was the subcommittee chairman for the January 6th review, and our buddy Stephen A. Smith, just to stir things up a little bit. But before we get to them, this is the interim report of the failures and politicization of the January 6th Select Committee. I guarantee you I'm the only one that's read this entire report, other than the congressman and the people who wrote it. I don't think there is a media personality out there or a host out there that took the time to read this report. If you read this report, which is online, you are going to be stunned and shocked. You may not think you will be, but you will be. It's incredible. This is a Stalinist committee. It is a rogue committee. It is a committee that obstructed, that destroyed, that witness tampered, that violated House rules. This is an unbelievable, unbelievable story of the Pelosi, Stalinist, Liz Cheney committee. And I want to just touch on some of this for you. So stay where you are. Listen to this. This is a big deal. First of all, Pelosi rejected all 5 Republicans who were suggested by then Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And she picked 2. 2 who hated Donald Trump. We know Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They make Liz Cheney the vice chair. The vice chair is typically of the same party. But they made her the vice chair, and they said she represented the Republican Party. She was bipartisan. The committee was bipartisan. No, it wasn't. The Democrat doesn't get to pick all the members and then call it a bipartisan committee. They followed no rules. They didn't follow typical committee rules. In other words, she said, get Trump, and more than that, get Trump under the 14th Amendment, under the insurrection clause. We want to get him on insurrection January 6th. We want to prevent him from ever running for president of the United States again. That was the game plan. That was the game plan. And what you'll find out, and you'll hear some of these tidbits, that she didn't give a damn about security at the Capitol. She didn't lift a finger. As a matter of fact, neither did the Secretary of Defense, as best as I can tell. Where was the Secret Service? The same Secret Service at Butler? Were they in the Capitol protecting the Vice President? No, most of them were outside the Capitol. The Select Committee, as they write, unwritten purpose was to prevent President Trump from seeking re-election in 2024. It was no secret that after Speaker Pelosi failed to secure a conviction in the Senate for the second time with impeachment, the only way to guarantee that President Trump could not return to office would be if he was found to have, quote, engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States in violation of the 14th Amendment. The idea was published in major newspapers within days of January 6th and spoken about frequently in left-wing circles. Speaker Pelosi knew that the best pathway to stop Trump from returning to the White House was if the Select Committee could craft a narrative compelling enough to convince the Department of Justice and the judicial system, along with the American public, that President Trump was an insurrectionist. That was the entire point. Do you know his name appears well over 1,000 times in the committee's report? Not this one, the Rogue Committee, over 1,000 times. As part of its investigation, the subcommittee learned that the Select Committee failed to archive or provide the subcommittee with any of its video recordings of witness interviews, any of them. As many as 900 interview summaries or transcripts, more than 1 terabyte of digital data. That's a lot. I said, what the hell's a terabyte? It sounds like a lot. It is a lot. It's equivalent to the text of 500,000 books, 500,000 books. That would be the biggest library on earth. That's what they destroyed. That's what they destroyed. Imagine the cover up here. It's massive. Concerningly, the committee writes, of the documents that were archived, the Select Committee delivered more than 100 encrypted, password-protected documents, never provided the passwords. It is unclear why the Select Committee chose only those documents to be shielded by password. So the Select Committee is the Stalinist Pelosi Cheney Committee. The subcommittee is the committee that has investigated the Select Committee. Despite playing a prominent role in its hearings, the Select Committee refused to archive any of the video recordings it collected of witness interviews or depositions as required by House rules. It's the most massive cover-up in American history. Without the full videos of these transcribed interviews and depositions, neither the subcommittee nor the American public are able to review and understand the full context of the video clips shown during the Select Committee's hearings. Remember, they brought in a top-notch producer from Hollywood. Oh, this was a slick situation. The hearings, the graphics, the videos. That's right, the cherry-picked witnesses. And of course, you needed to censor other information. You needed to destroy other information. You had to keep certain witnesses as far away from the hearing table as possible. That's what went on here. And so when this report comes out, the press all but ignores it. And as I said, I guarantee you nobody's read it but me. Representative Cheney's influence on the committee's work and the conclusions it drew cannot be overstated. She was the driving force. Her hate for Trump knew no bounds. Before the Select Committee published its final report, 15 current and former staffers approached the Washington Post to express deep frustration with Representative Cheney's heavy-handed oversight of the Select Committee's work. The article states that committee staff members were floored when told that the final report would focus almost entirely on Trump. Another staff member stated, when the Select Committee became a Cheney 2024 campaign, many of us became discouraged. The article continues. People familiar with the committee's work said Cheney has taken a far more hands-on role than Chairman Benny Thompson. And she's said by multiple staffers to want the report to focus on Trump and has pushed for the hearings to focus extensively on his conduct and not what she views as other so-called sideshows. Now, the key witness they used, you might remember this, all the trauma. Cassidy Hutchinson. Who the hell is she? Oh, she's a big deal. And Lynn Cheney took her under her wing, so to speak. And they go on here about how Hutchinson gave sworn testimony and her testimony changed over time and her lawyer changed. At the behest of individuals, the report says, including the vice chair, Liz Cheney. Cheney covertly assisted Hutchinson and influenced her to fire her attorney. And then they smeared her attorney. They smeared her attorney. Her attorney, who was willing to help her for free, she needed an attorney. And so the Trump people found her an attorney, not to cover up, because she needed an attorney. She could have picked anyone she wanted. Select Committee findings and evidence that disprove Cassidy Hutchinson's allegations. Remember the Hollywood guys and the media and the Democrats? All the stuff was prime time, either 8 p.m. Eastern or 10 p.m. Eastern. Oh, my God. Cassidy Hutchinson. Who? Oh, my God. It's unbelievable. Despite the Select Committee's exhaustive interviews of hundreds of witnesses, Cassidy Hutchinson was the only witness to testify to a series of specific outrageous claims about President Trump on January 6, 2021. The only one. Nearly all her allegations involve incidents to which she was not an eyewitness. And the parties she credited for relaying those alleged events to her categorically denied her claims. Wow. Ultimately, Chairman Lodermilk and the subcommittee uncovered evidence available to the Select Committee, they write, disproving her 8 most sensational claims. Finding 1, President Trump did not attack his Secret Service detail at any time on January 6th. That was her testimony that he did. Finding 2, there was no pre-planned off-the-record move to the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6th. Period. Finding 3. There's no evidence that President Trump agreed with rioters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And they have details, they have photographs, they have references, footnotes. This is a thorough, complete report. Finding 4, Cassidy Hutchinson falsely claimed to have drafted a handwritten note for President Trump on January 6th, says their report. Finding 5, President Trump did not have intelligence indicating violence on the morning of January 6th. Finding 6, the report states, quote, Cassidy Hutchinson lied about the classification status of documents to disparage Mark Meadows, the then chief of staff. Finding 7, Representative Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson attempted to disbar Stephen Passantino, her first lawyer. Finding 8, Cassidy Hutchinson misrepresented President Trump's actions at Lafayette Square Park in the summer of 2020. Now you know why the media is not reporting on this. And another finding, President Trump did not attack his Secret Service detail at any time. We've talked about that. The Select Committee did not give President Trump's Secret Service driver the opportunity to give his recollection of those events until November 22. He testified that he had not been contacted by the Select Committee in any way until that time. The driver testified that it never happened. So you have an allegation being made, so-and-so, the Secret Service driver, told me XYZ, or I overheard him speaking. Well, if you're a first-year law student, and you're a D student at that, the first thing you do is say, all right, who are we talking about? That Secret Service guy? Let's get him in here and get his testimony under oath. They didn't do that. Not till much later when it didn't matter. What else? The Select Committee proactively took measures to prevent the public and congressional Republicans from accessing a substantial amount of material, as we pointed out, in contravention of House rules. This includes all video recordings of hundreds of interviews, transcripts of several key interviews, and several terabytes, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of the equivalent of books of data. In addition to deleting data, the Select Committee effectively concealed many vital interviews from subsequent congressional committees by giving custody, quote unquote, of those transcripts to the executive agencies, to the Biden regime, like the Department of Homeland Security. And instead of archiving those transcripts with the clerk of the House as mandated by the rules of the House, the Select Committee deleted its copies of those transcripts. It gives it to the Biden regime and destroys them, so the incoming Republican majority can't see them. You believe this? And because of this decision, it took the subcommittee several months to recover copies of those transcripts from the Department of Homeland Security. So now you have the majority in the House begging the Biden regime, can we have some of our documents back? And it was like pulling teeth, and they redacted a whole bunch of them, and they withheld a whole bunch of them. And when the documents were finally delivered, they were incomplete, and they contained significant redactions. The Select Committee's efforts to conceal those records from later congressional review led to predictable and unnecessary delays. They were sabotaged. They were sabotaged by the committee members, and the staff, and somebody needs to get to the bottom of that. The subcommittee, in long-standing negotiations with the White House and DHS, recovered 17 transcribed interview transcripts. 17. Wow. That the Select Committee failed to archive in clear violation of House rules. These transcripts included United States Secret Service agents and other White House employees. Many of these transcripts directly refute the narrative told by the Select Committee, yet they were never archived in the House. Additionally, the Select Committee did not conduct most of these interviews until November 2022, after Democrats lost their majority in Congress. Wow. Media concerned about this? No. It's like George Stephanopoulos is upset. He smears Donald Trump about rape. They give him a brand new contract. All the media circling the wagons. Oh, look what we're doing to the First Amendment. First Amendment? You accuse people of the most horrific crime. That's not protected by the First Amendment. Now let's go to Nancy Pelosi. What role did she play? Uncovered HBO video footage in 2022. Home Box Office released a documentary film, Pelosi in the House, focused on the life and career of Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. This documentary film was directed and produced by her daughter, Alexandra. The documentary included footage of Speaker Pelosi and members of the House and Senate leadership after being evacuated from the Capitol complex on January 6, 2021. The Select Committee was in possession of Alexandra Pelosi's footage throughout their investigation. However, the Select Committee did not publicly release any of the video, and furthermore, did not archive this footage at the end of the 117th Congress, the Democrats, or hand it over when Republicans took majority in the House of Representatives in 2023. Despite attempts to conceal the footage, Chairman Lodermilk, who will be on this program in moments, secured various clips from HBO containing candid details regarding the events and individuals at the U.S. Capitol on January 6. On May 23, 2024, Lodermilk wrote to HBO, and they got the information. The footage, which the Select Committee chose to conceal from the public, conceal its release, contained shocking new information regarding Speaker Pelosi's movements and communication on January 6. In one clip, while being evacuated from the Capitol, Speaker Pelosi takes responsibility for the lack of security at the U.S. House. In a very panicked exchange, Speaker Pelosi admits to her chief of staff, Terry McCullough, that she bears responsibility for not having adequate security. No, it's not a question of how they don't know, they clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them. Just prepare for more, meaning the National Guard and security generally. And prior to January 6th, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief was required by law to receive approval from the Capitol Police Board before directly requesting assistance from the D.C. National Guard. This requirement caused significant delays in the deployment of the National Guard and therefore delayed law enforcement's efforts to secure the Capitol. And there's an entire section on the Pentagon that is shocking. What did the Pentagon know, and when did it know it? Finding 1, the acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, dismissed President Trump, as the report says, January 3, 2021 order to use any and all military assets necessary to ensure safety for the planned demonstrations on January 6. That's what President Trump told his acting Defense Secretary. Do we need National Guard? I'll call up National Guard. We got to make sure it's protected. Finding 1 by this committee says he ignored it. Finding 2, the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, intentionally delayed, from the report, the D.C. National Guard response to the U.S. Capitol on January 6. Although approved by the Secretary of Defense at 3:04 p.m., Secretary McCarthy delayed and failed to communicate deployment orders to the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard. So they're sitting there for hours. Finding number 3, at 3:18 p.m. on January 6, Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, deliberately deceived, they write in the report, congressional leaders by stating the D.C. National Guard was physically moving to the Capitol, with full knowledge these forces had yet to receive any orders. The false statements contributed to decisions made by congressional leaders regarding the security response to the Capitol. Finding 4 by the Lodermilk Committee. The Department of Defense Inspector General published a flawed report that contains fabricated information, ignores crucial information, fails to interview key individuals, and appears to have collaborated with the DOD to portray false narrative. They had scores of whistleblowers from the National Guard and other parts of the Pentagon coming to this committee to tell them that IG report was BS. Finding 5, DOD and DOD-IG knowingly and inaccurately placed blame on the D.C. National Guard leadership for the delayed response. Finding 6, DOD-IG was not responsive to the subcommittee's requests and at times obstructed the subcommittee's work. The subcommittee has detected an inappropriately close relationship between the DOD Inspector General and the DOD, which compromises the Inspector General's ability to conduct objective oversight. No wonder they don't want Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. We got a good old boys and a good old girls network there. What about the Secret Service? Our fantastic Secret Service, where were they? The number that were able to come inside was limited. And the Secret Service were there to protect the Vice President of the United States. The counter-assault team, or CAT, was outside the building and did not enter when it was breached because they didn't know the layout of the Capitol. Complete screw-up. Secret Service either did not receive or did not heed any intelligence products about the threats to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, including the FBI Norfolk report and the Postal Inspection Service report. Secret Service Protective Intelligence Division's personnel marched for Trump. That brief did not include any indications of potential civil disobedience. Secret Service guidance did not include instruction on what exterior areas should be swept by K-9 for buildings like the DNC, and it goes on and on. This is the real January 6th report, and you'll notice it says it's the initial report. And this committee, this Pelosi, disgusting Stalinist Cheney committee. They went on to allege violations of 4 criminal statutes by President Trump in both the run-up to the riot and during the insurrection itself, as they called it. It recommended the former president for prosecution to the Department of Justice. They recommended conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress, conspiracy to make a false statement, and aiding an insurrection. None of those charges were brought. Some of them were included in some of the comments by the rogue prosecutor Smith. They also shared information with Fannie Willis, who's now been pulled off that case in Atlanta. You see what's taking place here? There needs to be a federal grand jury under a new U.S. attorney, or yes, a special counsel, to investigate whether and or the extent to which members of Congress on this committee and their staffers and witnesses who testified under oath committed federal offenses. This is not covered by the speech and debate clause, as I explained last week. This is way outside Congress's lane when they're trying to influence a criminal investigation, trying to cause a criminal investigation, trying to prevent a Donald Trump, disqualify him for running for president again. You want to talk about an insurrection? You want to talk about a coup? This report, that committee, that's an insurrection. That's a coup. This is a grotesque attack on the American system. And this isn't about retribution. This is about getting it right and fixing it. That January 6th committee was the most outrageous committee, certainly in modern American history, if ever. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. You've heard me talking about Representative Barry Lodermilk, Georgia Congressman. He's the chairman of this subcommittee of the House Financial Services Committee and Oversight, and he's done a fantastic job, he and his staff. It's much harder to dig through what another committee has done with the enormous amount of information and the enormous amount of information that's been destroyed and so forth than it is to actually conduct a regular investigation. So, Congressman, I want to ask you this. You walk into this responsibility, you're handed this responsibility, your staff's handed this responsibility, and then you find out, oh my God, they destroyed the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of books. We can't find the videos. You really had to work hard to piece this together, didn't you?
We absolutely did, and I give a lot of credit to our team they were dedicated to this task, and they were relentless. And, we weren't sure if we were going to ever recover it all, which we haven't. Those videos that you just referenced, they're gone. No one seems to know what happened to them. But one thing we started realizing is there's a reason we don't have this information. It isn't just haphazard that there's missing documents. There seemed to be rhyme and reason. As we started digging into them, we started finding out, well, it was documents and information that did not play into their star witnesses' accounts of things that happened, nor in some cases it was just information that didn't support their predetermined narrative that Trump caused all of January 6th. That's what they wanted to get at. And as you have seen in our report, it was a massive failure at several levels in several entities of government. And then the big concern that we had is the cover-up that followed. And so how many agencies just stood quietly while the Select Committee pinned everything on the shoulders of people like Donald Trump, former Capitol Police Chief Sund, the D.C. National Guard. They just sat quietly while they allowed the Select Committee to take all of this and put it on their shoulders. And so we want to make sure that, America understood what really happened, and more importantly, that justice would be served.
Congressman Lodermilk, let me ask you this. Have you sat down with the New York Times? Have they interviewed you about this? Have you sat down with the Washington Post? Have they interviewed you about this? How about 60 Minutes? How about George Stephanopoulos? How about the Today Show? Has anybody sat down and said, my God, we read this report. It's unbelievable. We have some questions for you. Have they?
No, not about this. Now, the New York Times have interviewed me about the Secret Service when we first uncovered that their transcribed interviews have been sent to the Department of Homeland Security. They interviewed me about that, but their article that they printed was nowhere close to what we were actually telling them and what we had revealed. the problem we're having, and one reason, and I've heard this from some people deep within the mainstream media, they're watching what we're doing and they're amazed at the information that's coming out, but they can't spin it because it's just fact. And so that's why we're not getting a lot of coverage on this, because they can't spin this in the light of which Liz Cheney and the Select Committee proposed all of this novel that they produced in December of 2 years ago. And so when they can't put a political spin to the left, they just ignore it.
The chairman of the committee, the so-called vice chair of the committee, do they take responsibility for the destruction of records, the destruction of videos, the withholding of information, the transferring of property of the House of Representatives to the Biden regime? Do they take responsibility for any of this?
They should, but they haven't. And this is part of the problem. Now, look, I can give Congressman Benny Thompson a little bit of a break, because from what we've seen in our investigation, he was more of a figurehead. It was Liz Cheney who was calling the strikes and balls during this entire game they were playing. It was her that was in the lead of this. Now, he'll argue that he kept everything he was required to keep. Well, he has a different interpretation of House rules and protecting and archiving of government documents than me and the clerk and others have. So this is, I think it's a case of semantics on their part. But yeah, when you have anything that is relative, and look, and transcribed interview that exonerates the former president of the United States, and you don't think that is relative because it's contrary to what your star witnesses said, I think that's very important, not only to preserve and archive, but for the American people to see. And they will continue to say, look, we documented everything and we kept all the supporting documentation and it's available online. Well, that's fine. They did. But it's the non-supporting documentation that tells the true story.
We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. The interim report, the report on the report, the January 6th committee. And I read this report, and it is so bad what was taking place in this committee, what they were trying to do to Donald Trump, how they were manipulating witnesses and testimony, how they were censoring information, and the massive destruction. I mean, it is a massive amount of information that was destroyed, how they're trying to influence the criminal justice system. Congressman Barry Lodermilk is the chairman of this effort. It seems to me, from my own background, that when the Trump administration steps in, there needs to be a federal grand jury that looks into the potential violation of federal laws here, because this is no joke. When you have a committee of Congress trying to instigate criminal investigations, you had two people, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, who actually went to federal prison as a result of referrals from this committee. And what took place here should never take place again against any president or former president of the United States. Do you agree? I mean, if they want to play in the criminal realm, then the criminal realm is where we ought to play.
Well, that's true. And, we've been asked all along as we've uncovered things and as you've covered this so well throughout the last 2 years, what about accountability? And my response has always been, well, that is something that is really an executive branch because we don't have law enforcement capability, but I would never trust this Department of Justice to hand out justice equally. So they've proven that they will not. But now we're moving into a new era, and with the Trump Department of Justice, they can move forward with this. That's why we made a recommendation that the Department of Justice investigate Liz Cheney for potential violations of federal law. And I'm only using Liz's own standards that she used. If you go back to July of 2022, in one of their televised hearings, Liz Cheney started talking about Donald Trump making a phone call to one of their witnesses. It wasn't even successful. He just attempted to make a phone call to someone they had interviewed. She then referred that to the Department of Justice of potential witness tampering, just because he attempted to make a phone call. Now compare that to what we have the evidence that Liz Cheney actually did. She did communicate with Cassidy Hutchinson. She did acknowledge that it was inappropriate communications. After she communicated with Cassidy Hutchinson then changed her testimony. And then, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, Liz Cheney did encourage her to fire her previous attorney Stefan Pasentino. Then Liz Cheney did help her find a new attorney. And then Liz Cheney did try to get Stefan Pasentino disbarred in Georgia and D.C. So these are the things that she did, but she said just because Donald Trump attempted to make a phone call, then he should be investigated. This is why we're saying, look, I can't make that determination, but the Department of Justice can.
Well, I can't imagine she has anything to hide. They just destroyed a zillion pieces of data and video and so forth and so on. It seems to me Nancy Pelosi needs to be examined. A number of these people need to be examined because there was a lot going on in the shadows here. People were giving orders. Somebody gave orders to destroy all this information. Somebody gave orders to try and influence witnesses. Somebody gave orders to try and prevent other witnesses from giving timely testimony. Somebody called in Hollywood to create these productions. We cannot have these Stalinist-type events and then pretend it's okay because the media are on the side of the Stalinists. That cannot go on. Barry Lodermilk, I want to thank you, your staff. You've done a great service to the American people. This is a fantastic report. You can get it online, and I encourage everybody watching, get it. God bless you, my friend. Take care. Have a great holiday.
God bless you, Mark, and Merry Christmas.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.